I'll just start off. I'm going to call the Concord School Committee meeting to order and note that we are being recorded.
And I'll call the Concord Carlisle Regional School Committee meeting to order.
So welcome to those here and watching. Thanks for doing this. This is our annual workshop. We're really just going to be diving in and getting a lot of planning done tonight. I am also going to do this as I remind everybody that we should try to speak into our microphones because it can be very hard for people out there to hear. So I'm going to try to walk the walk as I talk the talk.
As I heard it explained, if they really wanted to hear us, they had to go home and watch it on television.
so I've heard. So we're gonna get, before we jump into our agenda, I know Laurie has a couple of quick updates for us.
Sure, I just thought it made great sense to talk a little bit about the last 2 days. The teachers came back yesterday. We had a fantastic opening yesterday morning, and I've been out in the schools at staff meetings, and I can't say enough. I know a number of you were there yesterday, but it felt like it was worth public note. I can't say enough about the energy and really strong positivity and enthusiasm as people came back. We feel like we've been here longer now. Oh yeah, the kids, we need them tomorrow. So it's been a great opening and a great keynote speaker, and Bill Henderson talking on inclusion. And I've been able to see, and being at 3 out of 5 staff meetings today, see what that looks like at the next building level. And it's just been really, really great messages of relationships and collaboration and watching it in action. One other clarification we wanted to make, and we do have a candidate secured at this point for the administrative position at the high school. His name is Jared Wickman, and he's coming to us from Newton. He has been here these 2 days. I'm stunned Newton allowed that, but they did, so we're grateful for that. And just a clarification on, as we welcome him, on the funding source, it is because of the governor's increased revenue. We are not jeopardizing E&D. In fact, Jared's going to come in September with really positive news on E&D as we close out FY19. So we're in great shape, and I wanted to give you an update that Jared's here and started, which is incredibly fast, and that just to remind you of the funding source and make sure we were clear with the community because we got some feedback that perhaps we weren't. So.
Okay. What was his role in?
It wasn't quite this level, but similar. He's been a team chair in the past. Other places have those positions where the teachers are chairing a lot of their own meeting. He was somewhere, Newton's huge, it's a 100-member special ed department, so they have layers of leadership there. So he wasn't at this level of oversight of the department, but he was at a fairly strong level doing similar tasks. So he's really excited to take on the administrative role and lead. He's got a really great way about him, knowledgeable and yet fun, and already building community. You can feel it. So it's been a good couple of days.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for making that happen so quickly.
We just feel like it all fell together. I think we're grateful on many fronts for a strong candidate pool, and then the cooperation from Newton's been fantastic.
Great.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we jumped over public comments. Do we have any public comments? Okay. Then we're going to jump right into, we have a bunch of meat to really dive into tonight. We have Dorothy Presser here from MASC. Thank you so much for being with us. And Dorothy's going to go through a bunch of kind of standard school committee practices and procedures and help lead us in a discussion to make sure we're all on the same page as we kick off a new school year.
Okay, well, thank you. Am I doing this right?
I think so.
Okay, so thank you very much for having me.
Is that working? Can you guys hear her?
Yeah.
Okay, great. All right.
Okay. So thanks very much for having me. What I'm going to do tonight is give an overview of roles and responsibilities in one level of looking at school committees, school boards, and what the research says are the best practices of effective school committees that have a high impact on student achievement. And then talk a little bit more about how it all works, particularly in Massachusetts, as we look at the roles and responsibilities given to a school committee statutorily. And then I'll talk a little bit about, you have operating protocols, a little bit about why school committees establish operating protocols, and get you up a little bit and do a little exercise having you think about your own protocols and how they're applied.
Don't bring it to me. Close it to you.
Oh, okay,
Thanks.
I'll give that a try.
Doesn't seem to be working as well as the others. Keep going, we'll just stop
Okay.
it, Dorothy.
So to sort of get things centered and started, I usually start out with a very broad question. As a school committee, what do you see as your most important responsibility? Anybody want to dive in?
That's a very difficult forced choice.
Yeah.
I don't know whether to put student wellness first or fiscal wellness in the interests of student wellness. But those would be two near the top for me.
For me, of course, what Court says is great, but I think that one of our most important tools are policies.
Policies, okay. As a tool, but not a responsibility.
As a tool to fulfill the responsibilities.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
I would say budget is also, I think, somebody in your organization said your budget is a policy document. And so, excuse me, I think it reflects our feelings on student wellness, on giving our educators what they need to do their job, both in facilities and resources. So I think that's a very important part of our job.
Okay. So according to the National School Boards Association, the overarching responsibility or mission of any school committee is student achievement, as you define it for your students. So we're not just talking about test scores, we're talking about what do you want your students to achieve by the time they have left your halls. All the things that you talked about fall under that umbrella. Obviously, the budget supports the work that you're trying to do. The policies support the work you're trying to do. Student wellness certainly falls under that umbrella as well. Go ahead.
I think that one of the things every district like ours always has to balance, and that's maybe one of the biggest conversation in the last few years, is student wellness as opposed to student achievements.
Well, and that's
balance.
that's why we define
Which
student
may be
achievement very broadly, and not just, what you want them to have, the skills you want them to have, the attributes you may have wanted them to develop. So that skill of wellness would fall under that, or that concern about their wellness would certainly fall under that. So I mentioned earlier research. So surprisingly to me, when I first heard it, there's been a lot of research that's done on what makes an effective school committee that has a positive impact on student achievement. And through that research, they've identified attributes and practices that school committees that have that impact have. Some of the attributes that they found are that there's a vision of high expectations, meaning that when there are challenges, when there are obstacles, the school committee looks at those obstacles as challenges to be overcome rather than excuses for why things aren't happening.
Dorothy, you can send them the
I will,
presentation.
yes, I will
so
absolutely
don't
send
forget
this
to sign up.
presentation.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, I will absolutely send it as soon as I get home.
No,
Because I've been
that's-
pretty
Oh, no,
pushy
that's
tomorrow.
okay.
Okay. I just
We
don't
don't
want
need
to
it right
forget,
now.
because I'll be away for a week, so I don't want to forget. And they, effective school committees focus on accountability for themselves and for others in the system. They foster strong relationships, again, amongst themselves, particularly with the superintendent. We consider the school committee and the superintendent together to be the governance team that needs to be able to work together effectively for good things to happen in the district. And they foster strong relationships not only in that group, but really with all stakeholders, including the community, because you really need the support of the entire community, not just the people with a direct connection to the schools, to be able to do the things that you want to do within your schools. Do you have a question?
No.
Okay. They use data to monitor progress. I know some of you are new. It takes almost no time to realize that there are tons of pieces of data that are generated. But effective school committees step back and think about what's the really important data for us to be digging into on a deep level. So instead of looking at a lot of data on a very superficial level, they're thinking about what do we really need to be concentrating in here, digging into, to be able to serve our students well. And they lead as a united team with collaboration, trust, and respect amongst the team members. So those are some of the attributes. Some of the practices of effective school boards are that they set goals and monitor progress. So I have adopted the phrase from one of the coaches, actually from the superintendent's induction program: if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. But in order to drive your district forward, in order to lead that, you really need to have goals, and not only set the goals, but then monitor progress to make sure the goals are being implemented. And those, well, I'll talk a little bit about the different levels of goals in a bit. Having varied and purposeful meetings that are focused on student achievement. So not all your meetings are business meetings. So nights like tonight, where you're concentrating on something other than just sort of the business of the district. And there may be other times when you want to have a focus on a particular topic that really you need to dig into. So you make that more a focus of your meeting than, again, just sort of chugging through the business. Engaging in self-governance. So occasionally stepping back and saying, are we doing what we said we would do? And could we do a better job? Could we develop ourselves more as a board? So again, tonight would sort of be reflective of that practice. And so tonight would also be reflective of engaging in board professional development. So understanding what you need to know to be an effective school committee member. What are some of the things about education that you really need to understand to be able to make good decisions? What is your role? What is the governance role? And also knowing what's going on in the world of public policy that may either how it impacts your students, or you may want to try to influence it so that it can have the impact on your students and your district that you'd like it to have. And then again, we put a lot of emphasis on that strong school committee and superintendent collaboration. Any questions up until this point? No? So I talk about that school committee superintendent collaboration, and these are some of the things that are in place when that collaboration is happening and the teams are effective. That there's a good understanding and a respect for the different roles that each party has. There's agreement on how to operate and communicate. For you, you have your protocols and your practices where you've reduced those agreements to writing, which we certainly recommend that school committees do. The work that you're doing at the committee table is really focused on policy and goals. And in that governance role that you have. Everyone, of course, needs to be willing to devote the time needed to do the job, ensuring that your meetings are efficient, that they're businesslike, that they stay focused on the topic at hand, and are driven by, again, student goals. Having workshops occasionally when those informal conversation might be a little bit more productive or easier to have. Sometimes before we put workshops, we would put frequent informal conversations and everybody's hand would fly up and say, but the open meeting law, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about violating the open meeting law. We're talking about sometimes a less formal conversation is easier to have to get some work done. And again, that presence of trust and mutual respect in the relationships. So I've talked a little bit about the relationships and the roles. It's important to understand that the committee and the superintendent both have a leadership role, but from different viewpoints. This committee is leading from a governance standpoint, and the superintendent from a management standpoint, managing the day-to-day operations of the schools. The school superintendent is going to come to the school committee with recommendations about goals, about budget, and about policy. School committee deliberates over those recommendations, makes a decision, and hands it back to the superintendent to implement the decision that the school committee has made. So the committee is asking big picture questions: what and why, how much, and the superintendent is asking what you might think of as the more tactical questions. How does the work get done? Who's going to do it? Where does it happen? When does it happen? You think the superintendent is going to implement. then the school committee, or the superintendent's gonna recommend, school committee authorizes, superintendent implements. Superintendent, or the school committee, particularly at goal setting time, is representing the vision and values of the community, bringing that to the table. That's part of what you were elected to do. The superintendent is bringing the needs of the staff to the table, so a bridge between the staff and the committee. Those two things come together as you're making your decisions. Both sides have the responsibility of promoting trust and mutual respect in that relationship, and when that is all humming along smoothly, you have the trust of the community as well. There's also a difference between being the committee, which only exists when there's a properly posted meeting, and being an individual member. So outside of that properly posted meeting, you have no authority unless it's been specifically granted to you by the school committee. You're another man on the street, essentially. The school committee is exercising its power through the authority that's been granted to it, governing through policy, has the fiduciary responsibility to make sure the financial resources are being used appropriately, engaging the community in the work of the schools, again, sustaining that relationship, and you're the employer of record on the collective bargaining agreement. As an individual member, you are expected to come to meetings prepared, ready to ask the tough questions that need to be asked to get to good decisions. And once the decisions are made, hopefully, even if they're not unanimous decisions, you've had the opportunity to voice your view, you've had the opportunity to have some sort of an impact on the decision. So you don't get in the way of the decision being implemented. Doesn't mean all of a sudden you agree that it was a good decision, but it means that you don't get in the way and the decision can go forward. Does that make sense to everybody? And of course, everyone needs to be dedicated on behalf of all the students. Any questions? Okay. So there's some of the research that has been done by a gentleman named Tom Alsbury focuses on this idea of balanced governance. So in thinking about the work of the school committee and the division, that governance role, and how does the sort of the division of labor come about between the school committee and the superintendent. So you could be in uninformed delegation, which means we hire the superintendent, let the superintendent do all the work. That's, whatever the old man says is right. Or you could lean too much the other way in terms of micromanagement, getting too much in the weeds of decisions that really are managerial or day-to-day decisions that belong in the hands of the superintendent. What you really want to do is not uninformed delegation, not micromanagement, but informed oversight. So to sort of be in that sweet spot where you're making the decisions about policy, budget, and so forth, and then ensuring that you're doing the appropriate monitoring to make sure those decisions are implemented appropriately. And then when you're in that sort of sweet spot, then everybody's feeling balanced. Any questions? Okay.
Makes it sound so simple.
Exactly. So now we're gonna get a little bit
Do I need to apologize now or later?
Right.
So it does, in the broad sense, it is pretty simple, but we all kind of know it gets a little bit different when you get digging into the work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the roles and responsibilities of the school committee sort of from a statutory viewpoint. And then what I'm hoping is that particularly the more seasoned members of the committee can talk a little bit about, in areas where it's a little bit gray, how do things happen, how do things play out here?
Quick question.
Yes.
Would you be so kind and just go back one slide and show it as one
This
more?
is
The one
really,
that talks about the committee and how it exercises its power through
Okay.
official action, because it really refers to the balanced governance. So I think it's one after that. Oh no, maybe you're right.
Yeah.
That's this one, and it talks.
that one?
what it does. So it was power exercise through official action, posted meeting, govern through, so there was govern through policy, and what else? I think it's the next one.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
yep, that one.
Yep,
Financial
Okay.
resources, engage the community. Employer of record.
so the school committee is the employer of record on the collective bargaining agreements. It's the school committee and the union that sign the agreement together.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Okay. Sorry, this is actually a series of slides to
Yeah.
make it look like it's one slide. Okay, so in Massachusetts, the school committee is the municipal legislature for schools. That's the role. With the responsibility of the things that we've already talked about, right? Establishing the educational goals, enacting policy, approve and monitor the budget, hire and evaluate the superintendent, and a couple other positions that I'll talk about in a minute, and again, employer of record. So in terms of goal setting, the school, in terms of thinking about why you establish goals, it's part of the way you exercise your leadership. If you don't set goals, they'll be set for you by special interest groups, and you'll be being reactive instead of proactive, you'll be following rather than leading. So that's part of the role of the school committee. When you have those goals, when you establish those goals, it helps the staff, it helps everybody know the direction that the committee or that the district is headed. You know, there's a clear path, we know where we're going, we have a vision, we have a way to get there. It helps staff know essentially why they're being asked to do some of the things that they're doing. And again, it helps the community stay more on track. And if you think about it, if you're able to present a story to the community about the vision that you have, it's also easier to sometimes talk about the resources you need to get to that vision, because you're applying the resources to a plan rather than just sort of asking for resources in a vacuum. Okay, so I like to be really organized, sometimes to my husband's dismay. So I like to think about goals as putting a frame around and giving structure to the work of the school committee. Because if you think about the work that you're doing, a lot of it is around those goals and making sure those goals happen. You want to make sure that there's alignment of those goals throughout the district. That the goals that are set district-wide, that the superintendent's goals align to that the school committee goals align to that, and so forth. You're monitoring progress towards those goals. The budget is the biggest resource that you have to make sure that those goals happen. So you're using, as you're making budget decisions, you're making budget decisions to support your goals. And then the goals that you have as a school committee, again, support those district goals. The goals that the school committee have really answer the question, what is our role in supporting the district goals? What's the work we need to do to make sure those goals happen? That makes sense to everybody? So again, you're in thinking about that alignment, you have the district goals, you have those overarching goals that are established. Sometimes it's important to understand that when you're newly elected, you're coming into an ongoing operation. So those goals are already established. You'll have the chance to talk about them as your time goes on in your term. But they're really there, the goals are really there to keep everybody centered and directed, and to make sure that you're not splitting yourself off in a lot of different directions in terms of your energy, your time, your decisions, your money. So those overarching goals, again, are driving the goals that take place in other parts of the district. They're driving school improvement plans, they're driving your goals, they're driving the superintendent's goals. Then the goals that the administrators have under that are also going to align back to the district goals, and the teacher goals will align back to, the building level. They're supporting the school improvement plans, all in search of, or in that ultimate goal of student achievement. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, but I do want to ask a question.
Sure.
And it's okay if we leave it to the end and then
Oh, no,
look at
ask
the
away.
practicalities of
Ask
the
away.
setting goals. So unfortunately for us, and it's unfortunate circumstances, and out of the 7 school committee, regional school committee members, 4 are all beginners. We have 4 and 1 has been 1 year. So we're coming to existing long-term goals. And the question is, how do you recommend, or when do you recommend, maybe it's today, that we review the long-term goals, and then do we do yearly goals as well? How do you,
So in
how do we put
in-
us and,
Yeah,
and
so,
the new school committee
jump
into
So in general, the school committees or school districts have some sort of, whatever they call it, a strategic plan, a district improvement plan, a district strategy that looks out 3 to 5 years. And then every year, there's a plan, what do we do this year to implement those goals? So every year, you're looking at how do we get closer and closer to that vision that we set for 3 to 5 years out. And so that, in the big picture, is where you would be looking at where new school committee members would fit in. There may be a thought about, maybe we need to have more emphasis over here than we've had in the past, but it's hard to have every year, particularly if there's new school committee members, or every couple years as a changeover, to veer away from a long plan. Because if you don't have some sort of a long-term plan that you're headed for, you're in that whatever road, if we don't know where we're going, any road will get us there. Change can be disruptive sometimes to making progress if you can't sustain some of that long-term planning. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think, and that's certainly part of our discussion tonight. I have the plan, and you're gonna look at your goals from last year and begin all of that discussion. We had a very inclusive process to develop what's in the strategic plan. So I think it really is a community plan, if that, I think, matters, in that we included wide range of community members, parents, teachers, kids, local officials, Concord and Carlisle. I can go on and on about, the efforts we took to make sure that it was truly a community plan. So I think there's probably some level of coming in and hearing that story and seeing what then of the plan feels like the priorities. And part of, I thought, the goal I had tonight was to talk on how we got to where we are, what the priorities were last year. We're entering year 2 of what I would say is 5 years. And then you can be part of that discussion. Now, some things will carry over because they're longer term than the 1 year we started with. But I have recommendations for you as to some of the things that we wanted to start to supplement from the other portions of the plan. And I think as you see it, you'll see there's recommendations for you to make, which is why school improvement plans haven't come to you all tidied up yet. My goals haven't come to you yet. The administrators haven't written goals. Teacher goals are just about to be written. So it really is this setting that's going to drive those next phases. So
I would echo that, and I think hopefully as Laura takes us through it tonight, those of you who were part of the creation of the strategic plan, I think hopefully going through it and hearing about it in more detail will help, because we do use that as the long-term roadmap. That's our long-term destination.
Yep.
And each year we have to look at where are we on that and what are our goals this year to get there. But like Dorothy said, that's what keeps us on a generally straight path instead of wavering back and forth in different directions every day.
And
So it's
part
helpful, very
Yeah,
much.
and part of the role of making sure you monitor the plan is to make sure that the goals that you set are having the impact or the outcome that you want them to have.
Right.
And that's where you may find you need sort of an adjustment, a little course correction.
Right.
In order to stay focused where you want to actually get where you want to go.
Yeah.
Make sense? Okay. So little switch. Sometimes my
it's because the USB drive is
sometimes
behind
it gets
the
a little
screen,
funky
so.
when it gets far away from the screen. Okay, so just a little switch to talk about policy briefly. So policy, as I said, is the what and the why. That's the governance role. And then the procedure is how. So the school committees has within its bailiwick policy and defining the what and the why. Then underneath that, the superintendent will promulgate regulations that put the policies into effect. One of the easiest examples of that would be something like the dress code. So you probably have an extremely broad dress code policy because we want to make sure that we don't have a policy that infringes on anyone's First Amendment rights. Then the student handbooks will have more detail. So give a little bit more direction to the students in terms of what is and is not acceptable to be in line with that policy. And that would be the regulations that come under the policy. Make sense? So the personnel, this is where sometimes there's gray. In terms of personnel, the school committee has certain responsibilities and the superintendent. School committee obviously hires and contracts with the superintendent. It is important to remember that the superintendent only has one boss, not multiple bosses. It is the committee as a whole that is the superintendent's boss. School committee also hires and retains legal counsel. So there's many times when the superintendent is going to have confidential conversations with legal counsel, particularly when there's issues around staff or students. But who that legal counsel is the decision of the school committee. School committee gives advice and consent on, these are the positions I said, and certain other positions before. Assistant or associate superintendent, whatever the title is. School committee business manager, special education director, and physicians, nurses, and attendance officers. So advice and consent means that the superintendent is going to run the hiring process, bring a candidate to the school committee for you to approve. As long as that person fits the job qualifications and is qualified to do the job, you can't unduly withhold your consent of that position. So this is sort of how the DESE and the Superintendents Association and the MASC, when ed reform came through, said, this is the way that we will handle these things that are, the law might not be as clear as people would have liked, and it's worked since ed reform to have it happen that way. School committee sets district personnel policy, so job descriptions are in the bailiwick of the school committee. And the number of positions funded, which comes through your budget. Job descriptions for many positions probably were set ages ago and haven't changed. But if there is like a realignment of responsibility, or if a new position is created, then it would be a school committee who gives the ultimate thumbs up on what that job description is. You establish compensation for principals and others that are covered in individual contracts. Very often that is done through the budget process, that there's a line item. Different committees handle it different ways. Sometimes saying, here's the line item, stick within that line item and do what you want. Or
nope, that's not what we do. They see every cell.
Or that within this range, here's raises are within this range, or compensation is within this range. If you want to differ from that range, come talk to us. And then again, employer of record. I wonder how many times in this presentation I'm going to sit there. Superintendent again is hired by and reports to the school committee, is considered the chief executive officer that has that administrative authority to manage the day-to-day operations, supervise the principals, and again is implementing the policy, the budget that is approved by the school committee. Any questions on that? Any local context to add? It sounds like you're pretty much in line with, okay. So then the budget. The budget belongs to the school committee, and you have certain responsibilities in that budget, not only in its formation, but in its monitoring. There's someone out in the hallway.
He's watching for dinner for us.
Oh, he's
Thank
watching. I didn't know if it was dinner. So, okay. So you have the responsibility for understanding school finance. It doesn't mean that you have to really understand the total nitty-gritty of every single, and there are people who do that, but you can have a basic understanding of school finance, where the money comes from, the different pockets of money that contribute to your budget, and then how it gets, how it gets generally allocated within your budget. You establish that policy to clarify the budget or the financial processes. You have in your policy manual, section D, which is fiscal management, that outlines those different policies around your financial processes in the budget. Appointing the superintendent and confirming the appointment of the school business officer are fiduciary responsibilities. When you're having your budget discussions, it's the school committee that establishes the budget that is ultimately sent to the appropriating authority, which would be town meeting or town meetings, depending on whether it's the Concord or Concord Carlisle. So you're determining how that money is spent, and you're determining the bottom line of how that money, of what that dollar amount is that's sent to the town meetings. Town meeting only approves the bottom line. They don't approve everything, all the line items within that. That's within your purview. But we often say, you're going to tell them how it's going to be spent unless there's obvious changes that need you to make some adjustments. You should spend it the way you told them you're going to spend it if you want approval in future
Back to
years.
trust.
Right, back to trust, exactly. Good way to say it. So once that budget is set, your job is not done for the year. Within that budget, you have the responsibility for monitoring the revenue and spending. Getting some sort of reporting that assures you that the finances are being reported accurately. You establish cost centers to oversee the management of the budget. Cost centers are sort of the buckets that the administration has the authority to work within to make sure that they're staying in the black. If there are big changes, you would expect them to come back to you and talk about big changes in spending. Again, an easy one is, we're in New England. You can budget, you can think you've appropriated appropriately for snow and for heat. Snow and ice and heat. Then you have a cold, snowy winter and you didn't budget enough. So the school committee or the superintendent or the budget manager will come back to you and say, we need to overspend here, but we have savings in this area, so we'll need to make some cost center adjustments from one bucket to the other. You certainly don't want to be down deep enough that if they're saying, gee, we need 10 more science textbooks than we thought, and we're going to buy 10 less social studies textbooks, that would be too far in the weeds. Some of the challenge in thinking about budgets is, according to law, school committee has line item authority in the budget. There's no legal definition of line item. So that's why we talk about setting up those cost centers as your sort of line items that the administration can work within in order to run the district day to day without constantly having to come back and ask for little adjustments. And then you also review and sign the warrants to authorize payments.
Right, but in that so to tie those last 2 points together, and you don't want to ever have to really do it retroactively because the money's already been spent, but we have the authority to stop a particular invoice on the warrant, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we can call one out if you don't.
Yep, and usually it's just, a question that needs to be answered, and then it can be resolved and go forward. Okay, any other questions? I'm gonna move into operating protocols, so any other questions about roles and responsibilities before we get to operating protocols?
Is this, I apologize for being late, but is this PowerPoint
You will
on
get
your
it.
site, or is it just
I
on
will
there?
send it. Okay,
Just
yes,
a quick question. So we, I guess we have a set policy, right, that only a couple people have to sign the warrants, but we all review them.
Yes.
That's the norm of
Yep.
school
yep,
committees.
that's general,
Where it
yes.
makes it a little more streamlined to process those warrants as they come through and they don't cause a slowdown, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. So do you have the copies of the protocols and procedures that you do? Maybe a good time to pass them out?
And do you also want to realize we didn't do it, it's probably better now anyway, we didn't do kind of a quick round of intros of all. We introduced you and didn't introduce all of us, so that you know kind of where each of us is coming from and how long we've been on the committee and that
Sure,
kind of
that would be
stuff.
great.
Should we do that before we jump into our
Yeah, that
own
would be terrific.
protocols and practices? Okay, you want to start over there?
Start right over here.
Yeah.
I'm Anna Staffy, representing school committee member for Concord Carlisle. And this is very useful as this is my first year.
One's Concord, one's the region.
Cynthia Rainey, resident Concord. I have 2 kids who've gone through the system and are now in college.
Yuval Elrich, freshman in the committee, and Concord resident on both committees.
Court Booth, Concord School Committee, year 2.
Heather Bow, and this is my, fourth year? No, fifth year. It's my 5th year. It's like, it goes by. Anyway, 5th year, and I have 3 kids in the system, elementary, middle, and high school this year.
Wally Johnston, I'm a Concord resident, and this is my 6th year on the committee. I'm chair of the region this year.
David Modell, I'm 6th year on the Carlisle School Committee, just chair for a couple of those years, freshman on this committee. And I also just dropped my freshman daughter off at CCHS today, so, and I won the 6th.
And David wasn't here when we spoke about speaking to the microphones.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
I heard that, but I don't know how, I wasn't trained, I wasn't.
You were
trained.
trained.
Received instruction, but not trained.
So also just to let,
You were late that day.
So you should have one document just for logistics. One is Concord documents, practices on one side, protocols on the other. Then there's a second document that's Concord Carlisle, practices on one side, protocols.
Okay.
Oh, we need another Concord Carlisle like this way.
Somehow it's-
just to let you know.
It's not a good sign. You can't pass paper. There we go.
While we're waiting, what's your name?
So my name is Dorothy Presser. I'm your field director
Yep.
from MASC.
Spoke with you in.
Yeah, and in addition, I have 21 years of experience on my own school committee and 12 years as chair. I just stepped off in April. So along with being the field director at MASC, I've sat where you're all sitting and been through all this myself. And
Yes,
sent 2 kids
in
through
your
school.
district, there is no limit of 2 terms.
There's no limit. No.
Which town?
Wally, do you want to change it here?
Yeah.
Do you want to change it here?
No. It's not up to me. It's a long-standing tradition.
We have a term limit by tradition in Concord.
Yes.
For the
Of
school.
2 terms for
terms.
school committee. And
Any
actually,
of the
for
elected positions.
elected positions of 2 terms.
Total of 6 years.
Yeah.
10,
So the moderator.
Moderator.
Can you
is
jump off and
1
come back
term.
on then after a year or 2?
Theoretically, I suppose.
It's by tradition, so.
Well, and it's nice sometimes to have that balance of sort of experience and new ideas.
That's the idea.
Yeah. Which, in my time, we were always lucky to have.
Oh, that's good.
Personally, I think this has become complex enough that if our tradition moved to a 3rd term, I think that would be commendable. That it's one
When it's
person.
time when
And
this
we
thing what's
have
going on, we have to step down.
We've had people,
We
we've
have
had
had 3
3 terms.
terms on occasion.
Sometimes that doesn't work out very well. So,
So you have in front of you your protocols and practices, which I'm assuming you're familiar with because
So
I was told you were.
Well, we briefly tried to look at them in the spring, but the real depth of review happened last fall when 4 of the 7 people were not here. So
Okay. So for the 4 of you, do you feel that you have some familiarity with the protocols and practices? Okay. So just a little background about, we talk to school committees a lot about establishing operating protocols and practices for a number of reasons. We consider them to be a set of ground rules that's created by the group that's going to use them. I can't walk in and hand you a bunch and say, hand you a document and say, follow this, like it'd be great. Because every team is really unique, so you really need to think about what will work for us. The idea of having them is that it enables the group to work together. You're sort of thinking about, we've decided how we're gonna work together, now we can dig in and take care of what the work is that we want to get done. You can also use the document for self-evaluation. So occasionally stepping back and looking at it and saying, are we doing what we said we would do, sort of that check-in. Are there things we could do better? Are there things we need to concentrate on? So part of the rationale for adopting the protocols is, again, to help you develop that working relationship amongst the team. Again, the school committee and the superintendent being that governance team that needs to work together well in pursuit of that student achievement. And in establishing protocols, sometimes you might want to think about what do we need to do better, but you might also want to think about what are we doing well? What are we doing now that works well for us, so that your protocols can articulate that, so that you make sure that you continue to do the things that are working well for you. It can help you increase the efficiency of meetings, just because you've, again, decided this is how we're going to conduct meetings, this is how we're going to work together. And then it helps you focus that energy and effort to work as a team together. Any questions? Do you have any comments?
Yeah, because I'm curious from all of you, do you want some time on these tonight?
I think that would be useful. I think they are worthy of a little bit of discussion. I'll give you an example. On practices, I would note that in my experience, we haven't relied very much on consent calendars. So
No.
if we, that's fine as a practice, but know that it's rarely used. That couldn't change. That's one I picked up on. Were I to, and this is just in the interest of generating a little observation and dialogue about these practices and protocols. On protocols number 5, I have had a couple of occasions, I put this out in the form of a question, I've had a couple of occasions where I wanted to send a financial question directly to Jared, and have chosen to send it to Jared and copy you. And I want to get a little more guidance about that, so that we're all handling that the same way. And I'm not too concerned about what the answer is, so long as we know what you're comfortable
Sure,
with.
all are consistent.
Yeah, and these do reflect previous conversations. We've been really good at updating these annually. The hope was you would go through me. Jared tends to be the one person that sits in a camp where it may make more sense for me to just get out of the middle and say, go meet with Jared, but it helps Jared manage his time. And I know last year we had a lot of discussion on this, because in the throes of the middle school, you told me to throw context in, so I'll throw that in on this one. In the throes of the middle school efforts that were going on, he was getting asked for a lot of financials on potential costs of projects and all of that while he was trying to do his day-to-day. And I had several conversations, and I'm looking at Heather, she was a big part of that conversation, that it had to go through me because he was getting circumvented off. And no matter what, just like when I ask for things, and I'm very conscious of that here, I try to be, when you ask things of people here, just because of who you are, we want to drop and do what you need. And yet the balance of the day-to-day. So it's very helpful if it goes through me, because then it just helps us vet what's going on around us. Or I'm more comfortable perhaps to say, is it something you need today, or can we have a couple of days, or just things that allow for some dialogue about the timeliness of it and clarity on what you're hoping for.
Yep.
So it does help a lot if you go through me, and then I approach Jared or whoever it is and get the information, and when the time makes sense, I'll either stay in the conversation with them, or I'll say, please just call so-and-so and have that dialogue.
and I'm very comfortable with that, but imagine a case where he communicates with one of us. What do we do then? Do we respond to
If he
him and
asks
then
you,
CC
yeah.
you? No, I'm not trying to get.
Yeah,
picky
no,
about
we've
it.
talked a lot about how I need to know what he's asking, so I should be CC'd on the email it goes
So
to
we
you.
can
I
reply
would
to
be
him
appreciative
and
if you
CC you.
CC me back.
Perfect,
He's
okay.
running a mile a minute,
Thank you.
and we debrief
So,
a couple times a day, so.
So while we were at it, actually, we had something happen last Friday, I think, that when Jared or Nikki are sending vouchers for approval, some of the committee members of those that actually approve only to them, and some do reply all.
Right.
And then what actually happened is that Jared said, guys, I don't have an approval.
Right, so
And I couldn't actually notice, whether I should actually kick in or not kick in. So I called the superintendent. So maybe we've established that you will answer reply all. So we will know.
So you need to be really careful, that's
Yeah.
the trick on that. What I said to Jared was, rather than sending out a blast like that, which in all my time here, we've never really done that way, so I think he was in the throes of a little
So,
panic.
so maybe not reply all, but it
I
has to
asked-
be one then.
Right, but what I asked him was to get his committee members out who are supposed to sign and individually approach them or ask me to help do that.
Or choose
Because-
one other that he needs if he
Yeah,
doesn't find.
rather than a blast out to all
We
of
started
them.
wasting time of me asking because I got this guy, I
Right,
need it
right.
now, and I don't know whether I should keep.
So there's always room for improvement on our end too.
Well, let's be
So
clear,
I
who's
wouldn't
getting
criticize
the
that process.
information right now? Individuals?
So that process, he reached out to me with, asking me to clarify to everybody. So the way I clarified it with him and everybody and Nikki is that we have 4 specified people
Right.
who are going to be doing the warrant approvals. And Nikki is going to send, or she said to me, she's going to send the emails to those 4 people
Right.
and CC the rest of us. So it will go to everybody can see it.
That's what's
But
necessary.
it's,
So may I
but it
suggest
is
that those
directed
that
to
may I-
those 4.
Okay, so may I suggest that those 4 will answer not reply all, but only reply?
That's what I tried.
That's what we do. That's what we should be doing.
Yeah, that's it, not always, because
Yeah,
times I
because we-
get an answer.
Because otherwise
times
it's too many emails coming in.
I think anytime we can reply to a specific sender, we're safer on any topic.
Yeah, I agree.
Unless we're
But it
trying
has to
to
be,
schedule something, which
Everybody has to be on the
seems to be,
same.
Sometimes
be
mobile
okay.
devices have a default setting of reply all,
Yeah.
and you don't know that you did not change.
Let me give a little, I want to give a little history of we've made some changes to the warrant process in the last 2.5 years.
Yep.
When I first came on the committee, we came to a meeting and there was a folder of warrants and it was passed around during the meeting and we signed it, which is not, in my mind,
Understanding.
providing the right level of oversight. I pushed regularly for a different process, which ultimately has become this electronic sending to us. And then when we formed the budget subcommittee, we thought makes sense for that group, +1 because we only have 3 members on that, +1 for the region, so we have a quorum. Quorum of members have to sign warrants. That we would have a process. And so that's where we are. So there's the 3 members of the budget subcommittee plus myself sign warrants. I think what happened was a little bit of a, it's summertime thing and the last week, and it has not happened since we started doing this. So I don't expect it to be a regular thing because, but it's also a new budget subcommittee. So, we just need to be as members of that 4-person signing of those to be on the lookout for those and to review them. And when they come in, review them. And I try to review them and send back an approval as soon as I get them. Just because otherwise it goes way down the list of emails and we could get in a situation like that on Friday.
Andy, go
I
ahead.
do want to say that this was a great opportunity for a new member like myself to learn about the actual process. Because we go through so many new procedures that it's hard to remember who is required and when we can ask questions. And so this opened up an opportunity to find out what's the appropriate way to ask a question about a particular warrant? Where would we have to direct it to all of the members of the group, or would that be just to Jared or to the superintendent? So as painful as it may seem, these are opportunities to really learn about proper procedures, and so we can, as a new member, I can do my job a little bit better.
I would say the best way to handle something like that is to reach out to either Heather or I, depending on which district it relates to see if we can answer it, because the less we can, I mean, the goal here is not to insulate the administration from us, but when we can easily answer something that relates to this, and especially in the process of learning, I think that's beneficial if we don't know the answer. Or if, once you understand what it is, you got a real question about what that is, then, that's after that conversation, then go to I would recommend calling Lori. I wouldn't say necessarily call Jared right out of the gate because of what we just talked about. But I think, and it's certainly, if it comes in the form of an email, the question, remember, you can CC both Jared and Lori anytime. That's not an open meeting violation. As soon as you start CCing other members, that's where we get into trouble. So, I think that's the better process, just because, we keep them pretty busy. So the less we can, the more we can sort of inform ourselves on these, especially with new members, as many new members as we have now. I think that's probably a safer approach. Recognizing that, if I don't know the answer, I'm not gonna try to answer it. I'm just gonna pass it on. So, does that make sense?
Maybe this is an excellent, I think, might be a good junction to, when we speak about protocol and practices, to actually clarify to the new members and to this new committee the position and relationship between superintendent members and the role of the presidents of each committee. Cheers.
Yeah, I think that would be good. I actually am curious if you could talk about that a bit, the role of the chair. And then, and this I think is an area where, the reality of the day-to-day may be a little different, or, can vary from the stated role of the chair from the standpoint of rules of order and that sort of thing.
Right. So, in general, and according to Robert's rules, the chair is the servant of the assembly, not the master. And the role of the chair can be essentially what the committee decides the role of the chair should be. Very often, particularly in committees that are getting a little bit larger, in order to help facilitate streamlining communication and not keeping the superintendent too busy. The chair may be the place where questions are consolidated. Or the committee and the superintendent may decide, I don't care, go straight to the superintendent. So I think there's a lot of sort of local context in the role of the chair and what the committee decides it wants the role of the chair to be. Whatever you find works for you is really the way it should work. But making sure, I think in general, you want to make sure that the chair and the superintendent are staying well informed. Communicating with each other so that each knows the concerns of the committee members. Another just aspect, because Evan talked about procedures, a number of school committees now are starting to create school committee handbooks or new member handbooks that give that local context for procedures. So it's not just you have a great list of general practices, but sort of, who do I call when? Who's the person in charge of this? How does signing the warrant work? That type of thing. And I can easily send you a couple samples, so you can see if that would be something that would fit for you.
That'd be helpful. I'm just
That
trying
would be
to-
really helpful, because we've been talking, Willie and I have been talking about that, and the idea of trying to create one as we go this year,
From
but
scratch. is-
having
Don't
a
reinvent the wheel. if it's
Yeah,
already
if there is a
invented.
couple out there that you could share, that would be a huge
Yeah,
help.
absolutely, absolutely.
I think there's a,
Maybe, yeah, so-
are you sort of at the end of that?
Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, you
or
did, I
not.
think there's, I think,
So we have to actually fill in content into this. Each committee has to fill in content to the role and relationship between the chair and the committee.
Yeah.
That's
yeah,
what we
I
actually
mean,
say.
one thing,
So
you- one thing,
maybe Wally should actually elaborate on
one thing you didn't mention that I think is fairly ubiquitous among is that the chairs work with the superintendent to set the agenda for
Oh,
meetings.
yes, yes.
And in that process, there can be dialogue that ends up, basically, a two-party dialogue between the superintendent and the chair. Recognizing that any member can recommend something for the agenda. And it would be then the chair's responsibility, one, to bring that up in the discussion about agendas, and to then decide, where, what meeting, based on the things we have to do, would it make sense to bring that up. So there's that process. There are times in practice where, there is something that arises that's of a, we meet once a month as a joint committee. We meet once every 2 weeks as a Concord committee. Things come up in the middle that the superintendent likes to run by the committee. And in that case, because we can't deliberate, we can't have a multilateral conversation. If it's something of just information, then oftentimes it'll be an email that will come. We get our weekly email at the end of the week of what's gone on. But sometimes something will come up and it's almost as much just an advisory relationship of, what do you think about this? And, that could either be just, based on experience of being on the committee and understanding the members, being able to provide some feedback that can help in that sense. And in other cases, it can be, I don't know, that's something we've got to bring to the committee. And, that's the responsibility of the individual chairs to sort of determine what those are. And I think feedback from members on how that's working is always good. And then if, there are things that, sometimes there will be things that are executive committee in nature that need to be discussed, and those end up, coming, that gets elevated to that level. Are there other pieces of this that you would?
No, I think that's accurate.
I think
I
that
would
recently there was an example of something that was crucial, immediate, and important, and then the modus operandi was that the superintendent actually contacted each one of the members.
That's
True. In
That's
person.
another,
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, and I can give you a little bit of the way I'm thinking or have been thinking, and it's totally up for feedback. So there's levels in which I try to decide who needs to know what. The chairs I've used since my arrival as a little bit of a lead sounding board on things that aren't huge issues. This is all managerial stuff. I think I probably want to qualify a little bit of that. Bits of what's going to them across the 2 weeks or month that we're meeting might be is often managerial stuff that really isn't full school committee purview, but could turn into public issues. So I think the more I'm listening to you talk, the more I want to distinguish that. The bigger things that like you notice when I get really concerned somebody is upset and you're gonna know, I probably will send you an email and say, just so you know, that's all by my level of inference onto how upset somebody is, frankly. I misread one today, you noticed that. Not totally surprised that I didn't loop you in, so you all got an email on something I've been in the middle of for a long time. So I use the chairs as a little bit of sounding board on managerial stuff. To me, I think they're they're a little bit of the public perception of the managerial piece and knowing the community and all of that, like, is this even a direction to go, is often sort of the conversation, or how do you see it fitting in, those kinds of things. Very random and eclectic, if I would
Yeah,
say.
I mean, to some extent,
It has a range of.
everybody has to have
there.
a sounding board somewhere. And, I mean, your position, you know, it's lonely at the top of the
Yeah, I mean, I will
pyramid,
not
right?
say you're replacing
and
my
shares-
administrative team.
of
By
course,
no
of course, never,
means
never,
are you.
never.
It's
No, no,
really
no.
stuff that pertains to a bigger political picture
Right.
often, but is managerial in nature,
Exactly.
and how do you see it might play out?
And I feel like sometimes in these conversations, a lot of the value of those conversations has been, you know, one of us has been involved in this for years and has a read of the political climate in the community, and that's the kind of thing that we're trying to kind of figure out together what it looks like.
Yeah.
But-
If I might add, I think sometimes you simply send out information to avoid surprises on our parts.
Most
Even though
definitely.
there wasn't any deliberation. And
That's
that's where,
always a
that's
part
where
of the
knowing
answer.
our respective roles, chair,
Right.
non-chair and all, make a lot of sense. So
Right.
we can do the no
So,
surprises correctly.
The time you will get a personal round of individual phone calls was when the issue is so incredibly sensitive and needs me to tell the story firsthand and isn't gonna be a public deliberate. There's nothing to deliberate, it's truly informative, but I want you to hear firsthand from me what's happened and why and how we're managing and the response we're looking to take. Those are I usually hope not to do that many of those, because means there's something not great going on typically, as much as I enjoy the round of 7 calls.
Right. Sure,
That's
you look
usually
forward
the
to it.
threshold, is that it's something I feel needs to be a personal connection with each of you, and I take the time to do that. Nothing we're deliberating, it's truly informational and just keeping you from being surprised in another way. But it's not an email and it's not a public discussion, it's usually personnel related and couldn't be a public discussion.
Things that would,
Yeah.
if we were having a meeting, would be an executive session. Well, you know, one of the benefits we have here of having the arrangement we have of 2 districts is, and we don't, I mean, I would call on David here to, are there any things that you do in Carlisle that, you know, differ from what we're talking about, or enhance, or?
I don't know, let me think. On the last point of contacting people one-on-one, I have a question for Dorothy. So we cannot serially deliberate, right?
Correct.
Wally can't call each of
Correct.
us and get it, you know, deliberate one-on-one. But you can, right? You can
You-
ping us each.
My understanding is
is
deliberation still has to be very avoided.
Well, it's not a
even
deliberation,
through me.
maybe I'm not saying
Yeah,
deliberation.
I hear where you're going though.
You
Yeah.
can, I believe, and you should correct me if I'm wrong, if Lori had an issue that she really didn't just want, say, Wally or Heather's opinion, she really wanted to know what the
Whatever.
committee thought, and there was no time for a meeting, blah, 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 it was sensitive. She can pick up the phone 7 times, right? And get an opinion on that. We're not communicating with each other.
She better be darn careful though not to say, well, let me tell you what Wally thought.
No, she shouldn't say that.
No, of course
She
not.
said
It's
it's-
not deliberation between,
exactly.
the open meeting law is a deliberation between
Right.
the elected officials.
Right, exactly right.
Right,
So this
right,
would,
but she could be the conduit of deliberation
Well, she
if she's
can't,
not
she
careful.
can't do that.
Right.
That's a really,
But-
yeah,
but
thank you
as
for
the-
finding
Yeah.
out.
If she
I
ever
can't tell you
repeated
each
what
other's
one
things.
person
Right,
said to
right,
the other,
right.
You're the only one that,
Yeah,
Right.
so if she's essentially, if you wanna taking a straw poll,
Right, correct.
then, and she's not conveying any information about any other conversations,
Right, she can do this.
And I think I'm a little uncomfortable with straw poll
Right.
It's not so much a straw.
reference, because it's not, this wouldn't be something that we would need to vote on
Right.
No.
in a meeting.
Right.
No,
It
it's
is
for- it's for her
as
to
you
do.
mentioned, a managerial
right.
issue that
yeah, good
you are,
clarification.
because of
Yep.
the relationship we have.
but why is what's your problem with it? Even if it's something that in the future is something that should come to vote, it's still not deliberation if the superintendent sounds each one of us on it. Gives us the background. This is not deliberation as open meeting.
Yeah, but it'd be.
Deliberation is between elected officials.
No, I
Well, I
understand.
can I
But
understand
it's-
Wally's hesitance.
We should be,
I don't think that-
discussed, if it's something that needs to be voted on by the committee, then it should be discussed in an open meeting.
Right,
Of
should be
course,
good.
but
And it should be
still-
voted
still
in.
preparing us with background is not discussion.
No, no,
That,
no,
that is,
But
even
that's-
that can be that could be an email to
Yeah.
everybody, let me give you
Yeah.
a background on this
Yeah,
issue.
but that's not calling
Right.
calling people to give them a background is different than calling people to find out what they're doing.
The
I hear this
superintendent can
story.
decide that she
Yeah.
wants more than an email, that it's more sensitive, than it should go in an email, and she wants to give each one of us her personal input and let us ask questions. I don't see any problems.
I think we have to stay far to the right side of OPM, and I think it gets difficult, especially when there's tension around decision-making and so on. I'm comfortable with what you're doing if it's opinion for purposes of your action, your decision. And we have to be careful that it's not gonna come, something that's gonna come back here. If it's opinion to inform you about your role, your responsibility, then I think we're not gonna get on the wrong side.
I think,
Right.
I think the sort of the litmus test here is, are you asking opinion to help make a decision that would be yours to make regardless?
Correct.
If it is a decision that ultimately is the responsibility of the committee to make, then you can get a sense which might help you inform how to bring it to us.
Right.
But then it still comes to us.
Right.
Well, these are,
Because it
these
comes-
are very subtle distinctions, but they're important.
But it comes back to the fact that each of us is only an individual, as Dorothy said earlier, right? Even if you've spoken to each of us for an opinion, you don't have a school committee opinion because there hasn't been a school committee discussion of an opinion, right? You just have 7 individual opinions, which is different.
I have a few recordings that could prove I'm not setting anything.
Exactly. And I say that not to tell you what to do as much as because that's
At
what
the end
you
of the
do.
day, I think that
You
the
know.
superintendent should not, I mean, we have to walk the line between the limitation of the open meeting law that we all live by and making the superintendent work impossible if she needs to actually speak to us. So I don't agree, which means I practically don't agree with the idea that if it's something that comes to vote, the superintendent cannot speak to us about it. I think she can, as long as she does not disclose the ideas of another member. If she comes and gives us background, explain to us, because she wants, let's say the vote has to come in the next meeting and it's something that came up yesterday, and it's, school year starts and stuff. And the superintendent wants to be sure that each one of us has the full background. I don't see any problem with the superintendent speaking to us.
Well, background is, I think
It's those
even
decisions.
Wally can send a note out to everybody saying, here's the background on this issue. We're gonna
Yeah,
take it
sure.
on. I often, when I was chairing Carlisle, I would send notes to the whole committee. I would put in big letters, please do not reply to this email.
Right.
Do not deliver it. I don't want a reply, but I
The
want you to
difference
know.
when you as chairman send it is that nobody can actually ask you questions about it.
Well, they can, I
The
don't want them to.
superintendent sends a school committee member
Right.
Right.
an
You can't
email
ask
or a
questions.
phone call, the school committee
Shouldn't
member
be, my
can ask
recommendation
her.
is, it shouldn't be by email.
Yeah,
So,
I think it should be a telephone.
but you could send something to the full committee and say, if you have any questions, call the superintendent.
yeah.
Right.
Right?
Right, but I think what
All right,
I was
I
going, I
think
didn't
we
mean to detract, I didn't want to derail this for 10
Yeah.
minutes. What I was trying to distinguish is, as the town official, she has certain rights, flexibility
Yeah.
that we don't have.
She is not a member of the committee.
Well, she's not
so
elected
she's
official,
not
so
covered by the open meeting law in the
I
same
mean,
way.
Wally asked me
That's what I'm
something.
actually trying
I
to say.
think I can count on one hand, in 5 years, when we have found an issue has come up and we've had to have a meeting in between our meetings. In which case we have to, we need
But
3
honestly,
days.
honestly, last week
to do
we
that.
had an emergency, and it came just before a meeting, but we had such a situation last week with the special ed administrator. There was
Yeah,
an
no, I mean,
extremely
you had a
short
meeting already scheduled, so
span.
we were able to.
Precisely,
put it on.
those
Right.
things
So
happen.
we
We
did
were
some-
lucky enough that we just had
No, that's fair.
a meeting
Yeah.
coming.
And so there have been times when we've scheduled an emergency meeting,
Right.
not to,
Not all.
be over dramatic.
All right, that's, I think that we all understand.
So a quick question.
So, and I think, when there's a situation, and, it's really up to Lori to decide, if there's something you need to decide, And, does it rise to the level of something that we need to talk about in an open meeting and take a vote on? Then, we have to decide, can it wait to the next meeting or can it not?
But even that one, did it require, I appreciate that you went to the committee for the approval, but does an administrative hire that's not the sped director or the budget director
Budgetary
require?
program there.
It was a budgetary implication
Budgetary.
that she wanted. our-
Was in the line item.
Because it was new position,
Yes.
because of the reforming.
That would be the careful thing to do.
You have a question?
One question. Your manual, does it touch on the procedures and some examples of how to well communicate as community members?
I believe that the sample ones or the exemplars that I would send to you too. But then again,
We can make
this is what it covers. You might look at it and say, well, that's not how it works here, and decide to edit and make it yours for the way it works here.
Make
As
what-
opposed to
make
what-
what
So,
yours
so I don't remember if you were here or not, when I talked about, there are some school committees who have like new member handbooks,
is. Right.
and I can send you a sample, but the specifics of what they have in the handbook
Right.
might not fit you.
Right.
The topics they cover might be topics you want to cover, but the
So I have a
specifics.
brother.
No, he'll send us the drafts, those things, and we'll throw them at Wally, and he'll have to edit them. Which is fine. 6 years experience.
Easier to edit than start from
Yes,
scratch.
definitely.
Go ahead.
Much easier.
Can you define for me protocol, procedure, and practice?
To think about that for a second.
Why are you doing it, baby?
I to be honest, usually what I see is committees that have operating protocols.
But what is a
Um,
protocol?
So a protocol would be sort of an agreement of how we do things.
The etiquette.
In
Yeah,
a practice, I think
steps,
is
yeah.
more, this is how it works. So
These are the
example of
steps to do
protocol
something.
might be, that we represent the needs of all students, or we will treat each other with respect. Practice might be, we'll work with a consent agenda, or something along those
Okay.
lines. Does that make sense?
It does,
And practice and procedure, I'm not sure I would
Yeah,
differentiate too
okay.
much from
I
each
think that
other.
can be part of the review of these two. We
Right.
took documents,
right.
These documents have been
These
reviewed.
around a while?
they have been around a while, but that doesn't mean there's,
Well,
We had a
Not
discussion
valid.
about, at one point, about practices and
Yeah.
procedures and decided it's just practices.
are we gonna have an editing session on
I
this?
I think that needs to be the discussion we leave here.
So I have some
Decide
questions I
whether-
don't want to get into.
That'll be our goals discussion later in the meeting.
Right.
Fair enough.
Can I
You
just-
mentioned that the food is here, is it hot or is it cold?
It's hot.
Food is hot.
So
Yeah, I
maybe
was
we
just
should-
gonna say, a touch base on, but also, before we break, where are we in terms of what you have for us,
Yes.
Dorothy?
So
You talked
what-
about an
yes.
activity.
So what I was thinking, and I don't know, you guys decide if it's relevant or not based on the discussion you just had, is sometimes I have committees that have these protocols in place. Think about what, are they working or not? And do an activity I call start, stop, continue. So I have you go around to the 3 pieces of chart paper and think about what are the practices that we are not engaging in that we should start? What are the practices that we are engaging in that we should really stop engaging in? And what are the practices that we're engaging in that we should continue to engage in? So it might be a platform for you to think about revising your protocols, or it may, based on the previous discussion, sort of be irrelevant. So I think the group has to decide.
I would be happy to defer to new members on that idea, but I'll give you my bias right now, and that is that it would be weighted heavily toward people who understand the committee and its dynamics well to give feedback, and would leave brand new members sort of at sea. They couldn't do start stop because they haven't lived the experience. So I'm not sure we're far enough down the road as new committee getting to know each other and knowing our practices.
Maybe it's an end of the year
Yeah,
activity
maybe.
rather than a beginning of the year activity.
Well, it may also be a two-part, I
Yeah.
think the way we've done this in the past is we will go through these collectively, and I think we could do that today. And then just ask people to think about those, and we schedule for our next joint meeting a review of the Concord Carlisle, and then have a discussion. Somebody, has a question in between, about something, we can clarify it. And then when we get here, if there are requests to change something or add something or delete something, we can talk about it as a committee and make a decision. And then have our practices, procedures for this year.
But as Howard says, I would heavily depend on your view of these
Well,
things.
yeah, I
Because
mean,
nothing really jumps out at me.
we already
Right.
brought
Maybe
some things up
do for you.
tonight that I think in reality probably makes sense to adjust. These have changed since I came on
Oh,
the
yeah.
committee. And,
So we will get to this evening to discuss one by one, or just read them quickly?
I think that's what we're deciding. Do you want to look at them over dinner and discuss them? or do we-
What
So-
Wally's proposing, if I'm correct, is dive into these now, but not too deeply, but enough to orient ourselves and then return to them, is that?
well, I was actually thinking we'd do it in 3C of the agenda, but if we want to do it as we talk about this, I'm fine with that too. I don't know if, you want to sit through that
Well,
discussion.
I don't feel I need to. I'm happy to stay if you want me to, but I don't feel I need to. But generally, when I do reviews of operating protocols with committees, particularly because you have experienced and new, the general questions I would ask is, does everybody have the same understanding of what it means? And particularly for new members, if there's, what exactly does this mean? How does this play out? And then the more experienced members, can weigh in a little bit more on how it's working, is it working, and how it's working.
Honestly, I personally think that the little I've seen this committee, there's enough respect here to the more experienced members that we can actually deal with it without a chaperone. But and the other thing is, I did read this, and I think it's going to be a very short discussion. I don't think there are many things here. So maybe we should actually go over it in dinner, but leave it to the end if we still have time, and move to more kind of setting the year and
Well, I wonder if
less
we,
procedural thing. Let's leave the procedural thing there. There's nothing here that is contagious.
should we get some food and let you keep going through your presentation, or are you at the end?
I'm at the end.
Okay.
Okay, well, there you go.
Okay.
It seems like a good time for a break then. I think the only question would be, is there anything else kind of, Dorothy's given us her presentation, but before we let you go, is there anything else that we want to cover here where we could use some guidance, even if it's not?
So I have a quick question.
Sure.
Are there any points that you have not mentioned in your presentation that do come up with brand new committee members coming on that you see most regularly? Questions, problems, things that it would be useful to mention before the end of the discussion.
There's probably two answers to that. One is I could go on all night, and the other is that sometimes those questions and problems are so unique to a committee that a lot of that would be, I could talk about it, but it could be mostly totally irrelevant to this committee.
I have a question. Is there any guidance from the MASC or DESE relative to, I sort of view, once I decide to run for school committee and get elected, more importantly, that at that point I become part of the body. And I give up some of my latitude as a parent and a community member, in school-related matters, because I am now part of an oversight body, and as of today, have fully moved into the realm of no students, no kids in the system. All have moved on. But there, were things through time that, I didn't go to a meeting with a teacher. my wife would. Or, things that I might bring up as a citizen to the superintendent, are done differently because we're members of a body that would bring things up as a body. Is there any?
So first of all, we would say that you never lose your rights as a parent by sitting on the school committee. I understand there are certainly instances where school committee members feel more comfortable stepping back and perhaps letting another adult in the household handle the situation, partly because of the perception that it's hard to take off that hat when you're dealing with a situation, but we would never say that you lose any rights as a parent by being on a school committee. The challenge again is ensuring that the people that you're talking to understand that you are talking as a parent, not as a school committee member in any of those situations.
You're practically not allowed to speak as a school committee member because as an individual, unless you
Can't speak
represent
for the committee.
the
Yeah, we
whole.
can't speak for
Right, but
everybody.
even so, you're right, you can't speak on the committee's behalf, but it's true, I have found myself at times, I have actually reminded people when I walked into a room and could feel that, this mom's the chair of the school committee. I have said, I'm just here as a parent, and make it light, make it a joke, but I'm only wearing my parent hat today, don't
Yeah, well,
And because I think at times there is that perception, and we might need to remind people sometimes we're only here in the room as a parent.
well, and I sort of think about it as being the opposite of the emperor's new clothes. You think you've taken the hat off, but
Right.
other people are seeing
Yeah.
the hat.
Letting people
sitting
see
on
it
their
anyway,
head.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is what I think you were kind of
Yeah, it's hard for
getting
people
into.
to.
Yeah.
No, but I think to build on that, because I feel that as well, and try doing that when you're in the middle of a very contentious contract negotiation, by the way.
Right.
I spent a year with a black hat on. But I think it's incumbent on both sides to act professionally, right? So I would not agree with, I would not recuse myself from a parent-teacher meeting. I go, they know who I am, but I'm a professional, I don't bring any school committee stuff to it. And I expect that the teacher also understands, if not emotionally, at least intellectually, I'm talking to a parent. And in my experience, a very small system, obviously, where we know each other for years and years, no problem. But I think it is, the mutual professionalism is really what's important.
Yep.
Yeah, and I don't mean to say that I've been to parent-teacher conferences and meetings. There just have been a couple instances where it just was probably best if I sit this one out.
Yeah.
My question was just exactly that. It's sort of a personal interpretation, but
Right.
I think it's.
I mean, if you think it's detracting from the effectiveness of a parent-teacher communication, then that's a personal decision, but I wouldn't say, because, I agree with Dorothy, you're a parent first.
You don't give it up.
You're a parent first.
And I'm not saying you do.
There's another thing which is troubling to me lately, which is that, at least in our town, we have a very difficult time getting volunteers. And especially elected ones, but just general volunteers, it's getting harder and harder because, both parents work and they're busy and, commuter town, and it's just no time. And so those few hundred of us that basically volunteer for everything, feel that. And if we make it too difficult, if we add another layer on that, and we allow another layer to be added, it's just gonna make it that much harder. So parents go like, well, why would I do that? So I think it's incumbent on us to kind of just carry on, just live your life. And that's my.
I have to strongly agree with that.
Yeah. Should we grab our pizza while
That's a
it's
dinner
maybe
segue.
somewhat warm
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
during
that's
you can join
that's
us?
good. I just wanted to bring that up and you're good.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
We're gonna take an official break,
Yes.
Right.
yes, or are we having a working dinner?
We can have, why don't we just take
Let's
an
have a-
official
Let's
break
take
and
a
eat?
break.
So we can actually speak to each other.
Yeah.
The liberation of the
Yeah,
pizza.
that's part of what I'm asking.
Right.
Is that allowed? You guys say, make sure.
You can certainly take a recess.
You can take
We can take a recess,
can't
we
do
just
business.
can't talk about any
You can have
business.
dinner.
Yes,
We can
don't
talk about our
deliberate.
summer vacations.
That's right.
Okay, then do we need to I don't need to call it
No,
housing
you
session.
just-
We're just taking a recess.
Say we're taking a recess.
We'll be back.
About how long?
Tell me till I start.
Approximately,
15, 20 minutes.
yeah.
It's
20 of 7, how about we'll come back and we'll return to session at approximately 7 o'clock?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Christine and
Seven.
wonderful.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
you.
Okay,
So,
back we go. To anybody
back.
who's watching, excuse us if we're still eating a little. Oh, thank you. We're back. So, apologies in advance for any eating noises as we finish up dinner.
Yeah. If anybody is watching and wondering why we're doing this, I'll just remind, this is a workshop,
Right.
which we do once a year. And
You should do it more often.
spending 4 hours here and starting early, we're having dinner. So
Yep.
don't expect it to happen every day.
We don't serve dinner every
Turn TV
meeting.
on to watch Spoken.
Right.
Maybe if we will, there'll be more attendance.
Right. Free pizza.
Free pizza.
Okay, so let's just kind of touch base on where we were. But Dorothy took us through practices and procedures. We had some good discussion. I know there's been at least one request to return to practices and protocols at some point tonight. We can either do it right away or do it later. We also have Lori planning to give us an overview of the strategic plan that we've talked about, which I think will really help us to start to think about where we want to go this year. And then we want to talk about our goals for this year. So are there preferences on whether we want to go back to kind of procedures and practices first, or do plan and goals and come back to it?
Fresh, why don't we just,
Okay,
I don't think we should
Jump-
spend more than,
jump back to it.
Yeah.
Let's spend another 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And if there are still things outstanding, let's make a list of things that we want to come back to. Does
exactly.
that make sense? Okay, great. Court, you had something that you wanted to
Yeah, I
bring up.
do. At the urging of a couple of members, it was in the spring, I believe, that the chairs accommodated us and we tried an experiment whereby when the two of you met with the superintendent and came up with the initial draft of the agenda, you would then ship it out to us long before the ink was dry, long before attachments were assembled and data was put together. But it gave us a not yet official or final picture of what the following week's items would be. And that extra 48 to 72 hours, it was hoped would give us a little extra time to A, think about it, B, perhaps pose questions or suggestions that might be useful. But I think it was mostly in service of simply giving the members a heads up as to the path ahead, more time to think, reflect, prepare. And we did it, as I recall, with the idea that we were going to test it out and see how practical it was to do it, and then how useful it was to have us have draft agenda in hand. So I wonder if we could just check in about that. What do we want to do this year?
I think it's early in the process. We should continue the pilot, if you will.
Okay.
I don't know that I'd add it to practices just yet.
Okay.
Might be something we continue to sort of work on and perfect during the course of the year, and you guys can do it next year when I'm gone.
And as a practical matter, this might look like, operative word, we would see something Tuesday night maybe, or Wednesday, and then we'd see a more final Thursday or Friday, often Friday.
You know, the only thing I would offer is that sometimes that means you get the topic without all of the information that goes with it, and you'll just maybe loop back to me if you have questions, and it will mean there are delays in that, and I think that, I don't want that to be frustrating or concerning, because it could breed questions that are then answered on Friday. But as long as we keep talking through that process, I think it's been totally fine.
I think that as it is, the practice that I've noticed now is that we actually get it once it's going.
Yeah, I mean, this summer, please don't use as a guide, because
Yeah, okay.
we weren't even in the same room,
But-
setting the agenda,
If I
or maybe even the
understand-
same state,
I
actually,
understand what Court is saying, or what I'm thinking actually, is that if we know ahead of time what's expected on the, we can actually come to the chair and say, actually, there is another thing that I think is important to put at this stage and not wait for it, and stuff like this. And, or things that one of us hoped to see now is not there, and we want to encourage the chair to actually include it. Because we think it's timely.
Sure, no, that
So,
makes sense.
Right.
I'd like to, if I can just respond to that and basically reiterate what you just said, highlight that, because I think that is the value of it, is seeing what's there, and if there's something that you feel is really missing, to bring it up. I think to Lori's point, my concern is that, you know, if a topic is put on there without context, that people can start to panic that they don't know the context and the background.
Look around
and
here.
we
Do
can
you
end
know
up
the
in it.
panicking? We're not the panicking type.
Okay.
All right.
Except for this.
Touche.
But
You're right.
So my
Okay, so no panicking. Only that I think if we're gonna do that, we all need to know that more information will come, you know, soon, and this is just a highlight of topics, not all the information that you're gonna have.
So my comment is, I think we should see it 24 hours before that posting deadline.
See
So
the final,
Thursday.
see the final,
Thursday.
Yeah,
the
because
final.
if we get it at 4
Is
o'clock,
the posting deadline of the agenda is,
close the business
Friday.
Right.
4:30, so for clerks in a town clock.
They close at noon, so we
Yeah.
usually,
Well, in the summer.
yeah, we
you have
never
to
wait.
physically take it?
You need to have basically 2 days prior.
Yeah.
So
if I understand right, Cynthia, you want 2 stages. Our stage, which means the one that comes a few days early.
No, I'm saying that we get to see it at least 24 hours
We
before the
actually-
deadline, something.
Including everything?
No, something,
No,
whatever
we
is.
actually-
Oh,
we ask-
even
we
the-
re- we ask for
Whatever's
much-
arranged at that
We ask
point.
much more.
Not
than
all
24 hours.
all the attachments aren't linked.
Well, it's-
But I think that Court and I asked for much more than 24 hours.
Well, I'm a little confused, Cynthia, because what I'm hearing is, on the one hand, could we just see the bare bones agenda items?
Right.
With the caveat, this isn't something that then is supposed to generate lots of changes, so that you have to scramble for the next 48 hours on our behalf. You know, use caution there. Secondly, use caution to not worry about information that will be forthcoming. If it's going to be forthcoming, we trust that it will be. And our homework still happens 48 hours prior. What I'm hearing you say is, in addition to, I take that back, what I think you're saying is give us something, if I heard you
Yes,
24 hours in advance. So even if we don't see the draft, don't make us wait for the final,
right.
is what
And
you're saying.
we can still add links to beyond that original post. You do that.
So that's sort of a
not as
fail-safe.
practice.
The idea, the idea is not to make more work for you guys, but to actually
Well,
use it as a working tool for all of us to be able to comment in due time before it goes up.
Yeah, I think that's, that's the tipping point, is where do we create more work for people needlessly?
You try it.
Because there will be more coming. I think the notion of doing it, if usually we set it the week of, but there's occasionally it's the week before the week of, that it has to go out, not the week of the meeting. And maybe the thing is, it's, the week that it's gonna go out, if we've already set it, then on Monday sometime, we would send it around.
I know we did that a
If
couple
we don't set it, because that still gives plenty of time to,
Oh, yeah.
if we set it 2 weeks before, things
No,
might
no,
change.
no. I think we all spoke about Monday, Tuesday, not.
Yes.
And I
And
want
then
to
if we don't set it until Tuesday or
And of
Wednesday,
course,
then-
if you have
Yeah, it's
things
gonna
that
come out
come
when we
out
set it.
boring and stuff, we're just giving a guideline to.
I'll give you my
And I
own
think-
opinion. I think it would be rare that I would come back to the two of you and/or the superintendent and say, I feel very strongly this should also be inserted, or I have an agenda add. For me personally, it's mostly just more of a runway to think about it, that's all.
Yeah.
That, for me, is going to be the primary benefit, but there is also the backstop of maybe the three of you extraordinary though it might be, might overlook something.
Maybe there's something.
No.
And to that point, this is a very time-limited opportunity we get to respond.
Yeah, we go.
If we have something to say, we've got to pipe up very
Yeah.
fast. Okay.
So I think you're right, I think the pilot needs more time. I wouldn't count the summer as part of the pilot, because we weren't building agendas in the typical way at all. And last spring, I think we did a couple of rounds where, twice, I think at least, we met probably Monday and sent it out after we met. So that was my goal, was to go back to that and see how it went. The fact that I have an assistant now makes a big difference, because that was complicating things too. So, and the assistant being the same person who sits here with you has already shown enormous impact, so I think we go back to the pilot, see.
Thank you.
On the topic of proposing something for the agenda, everybody's aware that as a committee member, you have the ability to request an agenda item, bring it to the chair of the committee, and then, I would say it's still on the process of setting the agenda. Is there, is the next meeting the right time, or is it some other time? And I think it's incumbent upon the chairs to then, say, hey, look, duly noted, we've talked about it, it'll go on an agenda, but it's not gonna go on this week, because we've got a 4-hour meeting as it is.
So to this point, I actually want to ask a couple of questions. So one thing is to put an agenda item to discuss. The other thing is we hear here lots of, everybody's coming down. We see lots of presentations. Presentations that I guess that the superintendent decides to bring to us, true?
I present the idea to the chairs.
There are things, I have things that I would like to see this year here, both as a discussion for us, but before as a presentation. How do we coordinate such things?
I think Wally's answer is correct, to bring up those ideas to the chairs, and then we can talk through.
Including a presentation that will come from the schools,
That would
from
be an agenda.
principal,
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
the
Yes.
regular
I mean, it
agenda
doesn't
item.
mean it's a topic we have to discuss and decide something on. If there's something you'd like to hear from somebody about something we're doing in the district, directly from the people that are responsible for it, I think.
And to
Let's
them,
talk
when
about
we
it.
see what goes this year, we can actually raise a few subjects.
I was
that
just gonna say,
yeah.
that's, if there are specific things that you're thinking of,
Yes.
let's throw them out on the table tonight.
Probably
Okay.
very.
Because
Plan
we
for it.
will start
I
to
have
look at.
I have a shopping list.
Oh, all right. I mean, we do plan each agenda a week or two before, but we also start to sketch in things.
Yeah, precisely, because
longer term
presentations
throughout the
that,
year,
things
so
that I
we
think about should be planned
Right.
way
We
more
might
than
say,
a-
wow, October's
Yeah,
busy.
and I have a
but-
running list.
But
for the
February
whole
could be
year.
a great time for that topic, right?
Right.
So,
Alright, so we get to this,
This is a very timely question by Yuval, by the way,
Yeah.
because as we're going to be going through the strategic planning for the district, there are a few items that that I've been thinking about, and I would like to see where we are so far in that plan.
Right.
So in the future, if we have to break it, that would be going to the committee chair.
yeah, bring it to the committee chair
So-
and then,
That
Chair can
procedural
discuss it.
overview is actually very helpful at this point.
and that seems like the perfect bridge to lead us right into Lori giving us an overview of the strategic plan.
Yeah, can I just
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
wrap this up, because we really didn't go through these. I would recommend, because, there are two sets here, that we approach this from the standpoint of either we can take them up both in a night, but we will take up the Concord ones after we've conducted the business of the region. We could take the regional ones up that same night, or we separate them out. But just with the idea that, each of us, before we come to the meeting, we're gonna talk about them, have gone through and looked at them and thought about them, and then we'll talk about them. And if we are thinking of changes, we will talk about the changes. Maybe somebody will be responsible to draft the language, get that out, and we will vote on the changes the next time around.
May I suggest that that we'll all go home with this and we'll send to the chairs if we want to discuss, maybe we'll find out that there's nothing to discuss.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I went over the whole thing, and even I didn't find anything to discuss. So-
Oh, my goodness.
Well, there, we're done.
Yes, we'll send them to you like.
That's,
I think
that's
that's a good idea.
perfect. Let us know if you have, right,
Yeah,
what
because
your
otherwise
questions
we
or
probably-
issues
yeah,
are.
Maybe there's nothing to.
And if the tally is there's nothing to discuss, we won't discuss it. Okay,
I
in process of-
actually, all joking aside, I think we should go through them as a group. We may, ahead of time, have decided there's not anything we're gonna change, but if we don't do that, then,
Yes.
we don't concur as a group.
Yeah.
We give it our
I think
express
that's
consent.
important.
Yeah.
Annually to do that.
Good.
Definitely. Great. Oh,
All right.
thank you.
All right.
This is coming around.
Thank you very much.
Made extra copies for the audience. I see.
Yeah.
You never
Especially, I
know.
wasn't planning on projecting, so we overcompensated with hard copies because I wanted to not be standing in front of you. I want this to be a conversation.
Yeah, perfect.
Just a little bit in terms of process, because some of you weren't here, I think it's an important process to just outline, and there's so much that goes with this that I'm gonna talk in high level and ask questions where you wanna go deeper, because I think otherwise we could do 3 hours on this alone. So, in terms of process, in January of 2018, after my 6 months of entry was wrapping up, one of the big discussions that emerged out of the entry plan was some desire for systemic work to happen. Just a little bit of background, up until then, there were lots of great things going on, but they were all very building based. So we had pockets of greatness all throughout the K-8 schools and then the high school, and there was no systemic view. So in fact, you saw Dorothy's slide, the first year I say, where are the district goals? And Kristen Herbert says, we gather the school plans together and look for commonalities and write the district goals based on what the schools decided. And I went, oh, not for long. But the good news was it just wasn't me who thought that. There was a readiness across numbers and numbers of stakeholders as I did my listening tour, that there was a pent-up benefit waiting to happen. So that all said, with a real recognition that we are 2 districts. So that's sort of the line we keep trying to jockey here, is that we know the high school is its own entity and Carlisle comes into it there while we build K-8 schools that are feeding into that. But we did need a common chart and a common course to get together on. So through a consultant work from January to June of 2018, Lori Likas came in and did a masterful strategic planning process with us that 50 stakeholder members sat in this room across all different representations and groups. And the intent was that each group that was represented in the room would then go back out to their own constituents and hold focus groups midway through the process and then bring that back to the large group. And that's indeed what we did. So January and February we spent as the large group looking at some of the pieces you see here, but really the task at hand was a visioning activity about where did we see the schools in 5 years. So put your futuristic hat on and start to describe what our schools would look like 5 years from now. And that was the task across every single group that had this discussion. So the large group did it first, modeled it, started to look at their feedback and commonalities and analyze their data, which then became the process that we duplicated time and again. So that happened in January, February of 2018. In March, everybody was charged to go out to the groups that they represented. And so many, 20-some different forums were held. I went to Carlisle with Jim. We had PTGs running them back here, CPAC, League of Women Voters, on and on. We surveyed all of the kids in the middle and high school, so we had feedback from them. We ran focus groups through the staff meetings and made sure we gathered feedback from them, and really just went as deep and wide as we could to land at the end of March, early April with enormous volumes of data. And in her masterful way, Lori had the 50-member group become a working group for 2 sessions, and she just literally divided the data up and said find the common themes. It was really this masterful qualitative analysis process. And as the themes whittled down through the course of those meetings, there were just commonalities from all directions. And, nothing was more reassuring to me that we weren't, you don't go into that knowing, especially in a place that hasn't done it in a while, are you gonna have conflicting ideas and have to do some resolution to figure out what the priorities are? And that did not happen here. We had consensus, very, very streamlined consensus across all of the stakeholders, which made the plan come together quite easily. So the structure of the plan, really, if you go to page 2, I'm going to go there first and then back to page 1. The strategic objectives were the outcomes of the work, which then led to these initiatives that are underneath. So the mindset here is that we have 4 overarching strategic objectives, which are the big picture direction that we're going. And you'll see ours are about multiple paths to success, which is really our teaching practices, engaging in innovative learning, and multiple ways for students to succeed, which under that umbrella falls our RTI and special ed delivery services. And I'll get to the action plans underneath. The second strategic objective, and these aren't in priority order, let me stress that. They're meant to be fairly equitable in terms of importance. The well-being of our kids, establishing and committing to ensuring student achievement through student well-being. Inclusive culture, is number 3, creating a collaborative and inclusive culture that in a community that values diversity and recognizes the contributions and uniqueness of each learner. And then the 4th one started as a let's build a middle school, and we stepped back and realized that there were a lot of really amazing facilities. High school had just come online. We wanted to be sure we were maximizing opportunities for use of all of our schools, not to just fix the middle school problem, but really maximizing those opportunities. And a very common thread that emerged was making sure we're using outdoor space in a way that connects to our classrooms. So those are the 4 major overarching objectives. The part I always have to add when I talk on this with any group is that does not mean academics isn't a priority here. What we very clearly had, and it's so reflective of us as 2 districts and communities, the expectation for high performing is an assumption. And the assumption of this plan is that we're not trading these off versus the other high performance. It's a balancing act, which we've talked a little bit about tonight, that we try to do both. So other districts have, if we look at other plans across other communities, it's a lot about gathering processes to gather data, aligning curriculum, offering rigorous opportunities. There was no need emerging for that to be a way of improvement for us, but it certainly is something that we do and believe in and needs to be maintained. So that's an underlying premise. We had a couple of really hearty discussions of that in the large group. And this is meant to be a growth plan for the system, not a keep it all on track. So the parts you're sustaining, you don't flesh out here, you just sustain them. And then if you look down through the initiatives, and I'll summarize these, and we can talk on any specific ones. The first objective under multiple paths to success, this is the one that I really in my head call teaching and learning, because that's really the focus. And our first 2 initiatives are around supporting students who need support, whether it be academic, social, emotional, any of those, whether it be through regular education, which would be RTI, or special education. And we've tackled that one pretty significantly here the last year. And then the later 4 are really about the what's next. Education has changed a lot, as has the world around us, even more so. And how do we move the educational pendulum so our kids are ready for environments that are so dramatically different in the workforce than they have been in the past? So that's the work we're starting to embark on now, is the innovative, the student-centered, the engaging. How do we shift it to a model where teachers become facilitators and supporters and not just deliverers of information? And we have a continuum of that, of course, as does every district right now, and trying to look at what our learning environments need to be so they build those flexible minds who are creative and collaborative and not just spewing information that they now can Google back at you. When I shift over to well-being, that really is meant to tackle our student wellness from a number of different directions, one being curriculum, so that we're offering formal, direct instruction in some of those topics. Second one is really about managing and coping strategies, mindfulness being one of our primary goals. And then the third being about partnering with the communities at large, because it is a community discussion. And then number 4, which we're also tackling this year and are well underway and making some progress, is the transitions, whether it be from grade 5 to 6, whether it be Carlisle to the high school or Concord schools to the high school, transitions in all directions. We know we've had some weak spots, especially 6 and 9, and trying to strengthen those and make them more of a process for kids. Peabody's a great example of the starts of that. There's a discussion that you'll hear from Mike Mastrula when he comes up, early planning for some freshman academy transition, whatever you want to call it, to make the high school transition slower too. The inclusive culture, you've heard us talk a lot on that. Our real focus last year was on the racial cultural components of this. We started to add and started to broaden it out into some LGBTQ work. And this year we're really tackling the special education side of inclusion and those with disabilities. So you can see the threads here is understanding and making awareness and a recognition we had a need for this was frankly the starting point. Working into professional development, building curriculum, diversifying the teaching staff, and then there's a 5th objective initiative that we aren't looking to really embark on right now, which is about the Boston kids and especially their elementary school placement. Loud and clear in this feedback from the Boston families through this process were questions of why are they all at Alcott and justifying that, or at least explaining why. So that's not something we're recommending that we tackle this year in year 2 of the 5-year plan. It sits there as a need to definitely review where they are and how it's working. You'll hear me say over and over again, we should never make a decision and not look back and process and evaluate. So that needs to happen. We're gonna wait a little farther in the plan as our recommendation. In the meantime, we're really trying to increase our communication with the Boston families because that is a piece of that discussion at least. And then the last is innovative environment. The new middle school is here, but then beyond that, facilities that encourage learning regardless of ability, safety and security, and I'm gonna put in environmental sustainability into number 3, which is obviously work we've started to have conversation on and continual improvement there. And then the physical environment and outdoor space at all schools. So our recommendation for this year is that obviously the middle school piece is going, and then 4.3 we continue to stay focused in on. Committee work that started there is a good place to go. We'd like to put 4.2 and 4.4 a little further down the plan. I think one of the things I see here is there's not really a completion to a lot of these, like to say we're done, check, we finished cultural competency, there's gonna be a check mark. So I think that's something we need to keep talking about.
5 years plan. It's
Yeah.
and it failed.
Yeah. So, and we continue to talk about outcomes, and I had a long talk with the facilitator at one point, because outcomes is meant to be your benchmark on how you're measuring. And the measuring we can get so bogged in the quantitative mindset of measuring, and we need to do that. You'll hear one of my recommendations is some survey work that triangulates across the staff, the kids, and the parents, which I think will give us some quantitative numbers to work with here. But there's so much of our work, because of what our objectives are, that are qualitative, which I don't diminish qualitative data at all. It just means we have to look at how and what we're gathering. So clearly we want to assess the progress we're making and look back and all of that. So that's the highlight. That's a 30,000 foot view. Each of these, which we're working on right now, updating these, because on the webpage, anything that's highlighted will have an action plan that sits underneath it. So part of the structure that the consultant brought to us with, you'll notice this is a 3-page plan. It's not a binder that's sitting on shelves collecting dust. We are using this as a living plan. So twice a year actually, we pull up action plans that go with these objectives, and they're linked as hot links right to them. They may be dead right now because I tried to update it, and I need to make sure the Google shares are all right, because I know even this updated version of the major plan was dead the other day, so I think I fixed that. I just played with them the other day, so I probably have to hit that people outside of Concord can see it, because
It just says required.
Google Drive is,
But it's right there.
It is there. So what this says right now is that during the month of September, we will be updating the action plans that support these.
Good.
And what that does really is drive a to-do list, but it's a high-level to-do list because the real nitty to-do list is sitting out in the school improvement plans. Because the hope is they're gonna correlate as a team, what they look for, and what that means to them. And that's where the building-based leadership still matters greatly, because how you get to some of these can differ school to school. My mantra to all of them is that we need to know what each other's doing and complement each other and support one another, and yet make individual decisions based on the needs of our buildings. So that's a high level view.
Yeah, the thing you mentioned I think is important, having some surveys.
Yeah.
I applaud you for doing the survey. I think that helps the school committee
Sure.
in that review process. But I think
Right.
everybody,
Yeah.
especially the high school,
Yeah.
which, it's time.
Yeah, so and I've mentioned this to the administrators, I haven't rolled it out to the teachers who just got here. We use a lot of survey data to build the plan. We have youth risk behavior survey data from the kids. We have a number of processes that continue regularly. But it just feels like to me, given the work we're trying to do, there's some very purposeful culture surveys out there that will hit a number of these points and give us some baseline data to work with that then if we repeat it, some of them are set up, you do them every 2 years so you can look for growth. And I just think that would help to give us some of the measurable piece to this and give us lots of input on how we're doing and
Right,
what we need to work on.
Talking about surveying the staff at each
Yeah.
site.
Do you evaluate your principals? Does this form their objectives?
Yes, it does.
Form the objectives of their staff?
So in terms of, let me start with me and then I'll make my way down. So my goals, you'll see, come directly from pieces of what we're working on here. For the most part, they're gonna align a lot, or exclusively. Even the ones that don't align have some connection back to being a means to get to this. So like the budget one will probably be more about budget process per se, but it's all about how to get this done. The principals then build their goals based on this plan and my goals and your goals. And then what we've been doing for teachers is proposing, we're not mandating goals to teachers. We don't think that's necessarily a healthy way for them to have goals in their evaluations, but we've been offering language that they can adopt if they choose to and use it as a common goal, and a large percentage of them have engaged in that when we've offered it. And the best part is when they propose goals and we can see that this is what's starting to happen, I mean, totally anecdotal evidence, but when they start to propose goals that align here, to me, that's what's really going to move us forward, is the work they're doing down at the classroom level that aligns to the progress we're trying to make. And that's what's starting to happen, both in terms of the goals they want to have with kids. They're starting to want to lead each other in topics. We've had a number of proposals to run discussions with each other and dive deeper into topics like race. And that's when I get really excited, because when you can go walk around schools and see things that teachers generated because they know this is what's important to us and they're believing the same thing is important, it's exciting. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I wonder, Lori, if you could speak a little to how, over the course of the last year, several initiatives under each objectives were added. One might assume that we are simply working our way down the list, but it's not quite that simple. And can you speak to how we've added one more in paths to success, well-being, we've added one, and environments, we've added one. What's the process whereby that happens?
Right, so actually part of tonight is the process. Those weren't decisions we wanted to make in isolation. So I had a meeting with the administrators and I knew there needed to be a starting point. So to Court's point, he's looked at last year's highlights and this year's highlights, because this is the fresh document literally as of this weekend, and he's noticing what we've added on. It did start as an administrative discussion, but I had draft on this because it does move and we want feedback, and that proved to be very confusing when people say, but it says draft. No, it's the plan. It's just it's a fluid plan. So I did just take draft off of it, but much of that was the mindset that we need feedback. So the principals and I reviewed where we were at. We started to look at, in central office obviously too, and target, frankly, we looked for where there were already seeds of things happening. But we're not going to leave it at that. We wanted your feedback. We need to roll it out to the staff and the school improvement councils and really look at their feedback. What I know in the past was when we highlighted last year's and targeted ones that already had seeds in place, we had a lot of buy-in. And so we really just are duplicating that same process of saying, we've already got some things underway. Let's talk on how to move.
Leverage the work.
Leverage the work, and also in the way we roll it out. So for example, the professional development 1.3 with innovative, interdisciplinary, engaging pedagogy. Really, we need to do some needs assessment. We know there's interest in this. Kristen's gonna run a committee. Her committee will be the liaisons back out to the buildings, hear what the needs are, hear what they see their strengths are, and really start to set that master plan that they're gonna be part of and included in even establishing what is the vision of what do we think that looks like in Concord and Concord Carlisle for us. So each of them has different places as to where they're at, but essentially we're trying to identify places we think there's already some really good starting points.
And how would you characterize the, for lack of a better term, the approval process? Are you looking for widespread endorsement and consensus and then commitment? Are you looking for anything more formal than that from any of your stakeholders?
That's a good question. I use this document as my widespread consensus and commitment, so it's a matter of how we get there and what order over the 5-year time frame. And you can push back on me if you would disagree, but because the teachers are the ones who are actually going to be the front line to all of this, I think they're the key stakeholder to me, which is why, depending on what the activity is and the place and stage we're at, depends on how much feedback we need. I don't know that, and I mentioned this, those of you who were there yesterday, I mean, a committee to start talking about innovative professional development feels like a less high risk environment to say we're just gonna start having this conversation so we can build to it. Versus some of these others where we're another layer deep in what we're trying to implement, and they need to be part of that conversation in a different way. So that's a long-winded way to say it really depends.
So if I may ask, when we speak about goals and then monitoring progress, which is what we learned now.
Yeah.
We all speak always. The discussion about goals and stuff speaks about well-being, and this is the regional, so I want to speak only about CCHS. But last year in CCHS, you had a kind of a spike of issues. What is being done? Not committees and stuff. What is being done and what was done? What is the progress in CCHS with well-being and mindfulness?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. So last year we took not only, because all the research we've done and the learning we've done as a leadership team is you need to have multiple layers to this. You've got to have the curriculum moving, and that's our advisory program, and that is actively ongoing review work that's happening. You've got to have direct instruction. You've got to have therapeutic opportunities for kids in supportive settings. But the biggest of those three is the classroom environment and the day-to-day interactions kids are having in our schools. So those are the three pieces that are underway right now, is looking at what advisory is offering and any related curriculum. We're frankly struggling. There are not a lot of options for direct curriculum in the high school environment for advisory versus elementary, where there's a broader group. So those of us who spent the summer session at the Cape did a lot of research and purposely went out to see what those options were. So Kristen will also be running a social emotional curriculum committee, will be her other large district-wide group, so we can do that work. The next task for us is to really work with the teachers and help them understand that every impact that they have and give them those really basic ways to manage a classroom that a lot of them are doing, but others are not. No intention, they're very focused on the work. And the message you heard yesterday, loud and clear, was relationships, because we know that that's what needs to happen. So we're building in professional development, we're building in hard examples for teachers, we're having their colleagues work with each other, and fleshing out that action plan. So we're trying to get out of as much of a reactive mode and build broader based pieces.
So about 3 years ago, I think 3 years ago, Challenge Success was introduced to schools.
Mhm.
Challenge Success is a process that I've learned in depth, as you know. And I think that one of the things that I have on my shopping list, and I want to encourage as a presentation, an issue this year that we take and tackle, will be really to hear from not from the principal, from him as well, but from Challenge Success, how they see the process in CCHS and in the schools. Because what I envisioned in this process was very different to what I see in the school. And maybe 3 years later on, we want to monitor progress, we want to hear from them how they see community involvement in it and stuff like this. Because when you answered my question, you spoke from the bottom up. You spoke about the specific teacher and the student, or helping a specific student with this problem. Challenge Success is something that comes and tries to actually involve the community,
Yes.
which means the expectation of parents, because
Yes.
every parent in the, not every, but many parents in the district are actually blaming the school of creating the stress, but we all know that the stress is not created only in the school. So the Challenge Success is a process that should involve the community,
Yes.
and this did not happen.
So
Or
we're,
at least, sorry, I didn't see it happening, let's put it this way. Not
Yeah.
in the grosso modo that Challenge
Right.
Success envision such a process.
so both, and I don't have all the action plans here to give to you tonight. We're still developing those right now. You'll have those later in the month of September. Both middle and high school have rebooted their Challenge Success programs in the last year. Both have been running parent events. The high school just received CEF money to have a community read on the name of the book. I won't get exactly right. Where you go is not who you are.
Yeah.
That kind of, whatever the title is. We very much believe and know that, and frankly, the challenge we're having right now is that all of those, this is the discussion we're having, so your input would be very welcome. Whenever we run those big picture discussions, we get a lot of positive feedback from parents. The piece we're hearing from teachers, counselors, when you sit one-to-one with a parent and say, maybe those Ivy Leagues aren't the ones you should be applying to, those are the shifting of expectations for your own individual child that are really hard. I had a long talk with the guidance department at the high school last spring, and that, in terms of community piece, that was where they thought some of the challenge was. And to your point, we need to do more community piece. We had a whole discussion of running.
3-4 years into the process, action plans is one thing, but I want to actually monitor progress. I want to hear from them, how do they think?
Who's the them?
Because they can give us comparative.
So-
The challenge.
and
They can give us comparative. They were
Right.
working in others. They were working in Westwood. I want to hear what they say about what we achieved in 3 years, as opposed to what other places they work in achieved. And maybe this will give us a.
So
maybe not.
we've stayed, and I think I want to give the middle and high school administrators credit, because the last year they've both re-engaged with the Challenge Success organization and had staff attend training, whether it be with travel or locally. And indeed, the high school got more money to continue to do training directly with the Challenge Success group. I think some of how I'm going to loop this back, and we can have the whole discussion, obviously, I think in a more structured way, but because there wasn't a master direction, each building was trying to juggle it from their own inner locus of control within the scope of what they had for resources, and a master direction was not emerging. And I think, but that's a year old, so I think that's,
Okay.
so I almost want to say those first 2 years were great dabbling in Challenge Success and getting some sense of it, but there's a much bigger picture there. The other thing I want to make sure we talk on with Challenge Success, you will see that there's a very academic lens to Challenge Success in terms of engaging school environments and the way in which we're delivering instruction. So that that thread highly pertains to challenge success, as well as some other very classroom academic based things. It's not just, they really see it as a whole package, which I think we would all agree. It has to be considered a whole package. So we'd love to bring you the high levels challenge success and have the buildings talk more on what's happening here. And I think for us, it's a tool to accomplish some of these things. But the community is a huge part, you're totally right.
So at the end of the day, I think that this would be, for me, it would be something that we should maybe push as a priority simply because it's not an immediate, it goes now to year 2 and it's a process during these 5 years so we can actually maybe set more clear goals and measures how to actually monitor the progress if we have a presentation.
So, Yuval, can we do this? I'm almost thinking let's start to make kind of our idea list of things that we're looking at to discuss, dissect, present about, whatever it may be this year. And I think once we get to actual goals, we'll also need to look somewhat back to Dorothy's presentation about where the responsibilities lie, right? Some of these will be Lori's goals, some of them will be our goals, right? It's not our goal to execute challenge success, but maybe to hear about it and be more educated about it.
Well,
So let's start to make our kind of
It's our
holding
goal, but
place.
it's us. Sorry.
Right, exactly. No, I'm just,
Monitor the progress, to set the goal and monitor the progress. The
Absolutely.
tools will be given to us in this presentation.
exactly. So all I'm saying
Of
is
course it's
we're not gonna define right now what it looks like, but only let's start kind of a bucket of ideas. And then we basically use this plan as our lens and our filter as we prioritize them. Does that make sense?
And with all due respect, I think that book is getting rather aged. I think that where you go is not, that was sort of revelation like 5 years ago.
And the book isn't the end
Yeah.
outcome.
I
The
know.
discussion point is the end outcome, because none of that would be done in isolation.
I
The
know. I just
point
like
is to be a group dialogue with each other,
Yeah.
to talk
That's
about
the Denise
what we're trying to.
No, that's
share.
the
Frank Bruni book.
Frank Bruni. I just think it's,
So I guess I'm gonna just say, that was a recommendation out of the Challenge Success Committee at
Yep.
the high school. And given the intent of the purpose of it, I would hope we could be supportive
no,
of where that's.
I am, which
Which
It's a-
book would you recommend instead of this book at the moment? Because I actually am in the course of reading it and I tend to agree with a lot of the points that they're making.
The one that actually Denise Pope wrote.
And as a matter of fact, it's a good opening for the discussion in high school because looking at the kids, how their anxiety goes up because parents are putting so much pressure and kids among themselves are putting so much pressure, believing that it's the name on that certificate that. So is there another?
I'm very comfortable seeing that the people who chose this book
Yes,
are
I-
empowered to
yes.
use this book,
I do.
notwithstanding our effort to try to stay
Is it
current
teachers?
too.
That was teachers.
Teachers
Yeah.
who, many of whom are
So
parents.
can we,
back from
you know,
CEF.
in the context of being a board of directors and not,
Oh, yes.
operating officers here, I like where Yuval's going at, and it's an issue I think about a fair amount. I think, there's a tendency, because these goals are, even though they're strategic, they're pretty they lead right into operational outcomes, and we tend to get devolved into that a little bit. What Lori said is really revealing, and what Eva just said. I mean, it's really parental education. So what is the feeling of this committee, especially from the Concord side, about the role of this elected body to be really much more of a liaison with the community? I mean, they'll do what they do, and mostly they do it fine.
great.
We have much more leverage, I believe, to reach into the parents, into the community side. And what can we start? Doesn't need the superintendent, it doesn't need the teachers. It needs us as leaders, the Board of Selectmen, others, to embrace this issue because it's a big deal. And we come from a very...
It's actually life and death.
Right. Well, and
It's practically life and death.
Well, and you
We
made a
have
point...
to all be clear about it.
You made a point a different point when we were just having a sidebar and break about the lack of diversity among the teachers that you saw. And you could say about the students and the parents. We're the same little narrow 1% demographic across both towns. And we all
Well,
push
that's wishful thinking.
we all push that same, Ivy or whatever, top tier, whether we do it knowingly or not. So there's a much bigger, in my opinion, there's a much bigger educational piece that needs to be done outside the school, in the community, and I'm curious about where we think our role is in that.
So that's one of the reasons that I think that the presentation, not by the buildings, but by Challenge Success, is so important, because they are involved for years now in precisely those discussions. They go to communities and they liaison with, I don't know if it's school committees, but with stakeholders in the communities to arrange meetings, town meetings and stuff with the community. Because, you know, let's be very honest about it. I don't think the implementation, the little I've seen, I don't think that the implementation of Challenge Success as is now, not as will be, is as much as I hoped when I started speaking with them 4 years ago. But at the end of the day, they can do a little more in the schools. They can do less exams in the same day. But at the end of the day, it's the parents and the community that are pushing the kids to a very clear direction here, with exceptions, but as a whole, and that's precisely now how we as school committee, not as administration, can actually speak to the community. I don't know.
We were elected by the community.
Yeah, but they have this Challenge Success. That's what they do in many communities. They can actually come and present to us the options that we have.
Yeah, and it's just a little feedback. We've had them here, maybe not as often as we could have, but we've had them here. And some of the discussions we've had is how to get people out. The world we're in does not allow people to all find ice. We do okay, but we're not reaching the masses. So we've had some different discussions of trying to find captive audiences to talk to. And, you know, the high school AD can get people out because they have to come to play sports, and do we tag onto some of those things? So we'd be open, significantly open, to how to help keep the message. The other side, that having talked with so many parents here, so many parents are very well intended.
Oh, yeah.
That it's not that there's an egregious thing to say to people, you can't do this. It's very well intended efforts going towards their kids. And I think that makes it much more complicated to shift, because it's that inadvertent, unconscious, I hear myself doing it at home.
And you really don't
And you don't even know you're doing it, and I think that's a whole nother level.
Well, there's good parts and bad parts to that, right?
Of course,
I mean,
of course.
your kids grow up to be pretty good kids because you're constantly, you know.
But that's why they, you know.
Right, I think.
When you hear the professionals, you know, we can, all those questions, we can ask the SPOP or the a liaison to the.
Well, and I think what I attended one Challenge Success we had we do it to our 7th graders. We enroll our 7th graders. So I was part of one of them, and so I only have one data point, but I did find it quite powerful, and it is the emotional jolt. So what's different about what you said is the kids, you know, you tell them you're going to this, and they go, and you know, but the parents never go to that, right? The parents need to go to a Challenge Success type session and have a whole day of, you know, confronting their emotions. It does reset you for a little while. I don't know how long that aura lasts, you know, but it does give a perspective that I certainly haven't forgotten, you know, 4 years later, 3 years later.
The question, of course, I mean, it's what I always say in high school, that, you know, when we have a presentation about drugs, about vaping, about the like 13 people in the audience, in the auditorium, when there is a presenter about acceptance to Harvard, people sit on the floor. The question is how to bring the parents to sit on the floor. But you know, maybe we shouldn't be so gentle about it. Maybe if they think about the stress that leads to suicide and stuff like this, maybe the question is not to be so safe about the call.
I have asked.
So can I just, sorry. Go ahead, and then I want to jump in.
So I actually have asked the presenter, what are the ways that we can engage as community members? We can engage the community. What are the venues? How we can answer questions? How we can put the messages out that, you know, we see are brewing in the schools. And there's no easy answer. That's the problem. There's no easy answers to reach the community. Looking at the talks that I have attended myself, from my perspective, there's always a low attendance. So you're paying all this money for the speakers, and then people do not show up. Maybe, you know, coming up with some ways that parents would have screening and technology where they can view it from their home and at least give us a feedback that they have watched it. That might be, there might be something for a discussion later, if how we can make that possible in the most sensible, budgetary but sensible ways. There are venues, and I've seen some schools do that. It is a very, very important topic. I know that the counselors at the high school are talking to everybody about this. I think that was the first thing that came out of our counselors, because they are very keenly aware of the pressures that we as parents with best intentions are putting on our kids.
Okay, can I just jump in quick? Because I think we have all just proven Yuval's point that this is something that we want to talk about. I could sit here and talk about this for hours, and I think we all fit. So clearly, I think this is something we want to look into more. I think David's question of whether we can help reach parents is a really good question. I also would like to bring that question back to those who are running Challenge Success and hear from them whether they think would be valuable, because we don't want to be stepping on people's toes. And yet we can't do all this tonight because we have a huge amount of things.
I think we all agree it's a priority.
So what I was saying is let's agree that this is a priority in terms of something to look at.
And it fits
And then I think
goals and measures and
absolutely.
everything.
So
And I think we just need to move our discussion along so we can address
I'd like to
other
make
priorities.
just one more comment because I'll forget it. If it's a numbers issue, and it probably will be in terms of if we did something like that, Fen, Middlesex, CA, I don't see any reason why we couldn't be reaching out to those organizations as well and saying, because it's the same demographic, right? And they got the same issues, and in fact, I've been to talks
A lot
at
of
Fen.
parents are
So, I would encourage us to be creative in that.
it's a great idea.
And beyond parents, it's the whole community.
Yeah. Okay, good. So
Next.
that's on our list of, it's in our bucket of ideas. and clearly one we all care a lot about. So now I'm not sure where we were.
Okay, so I can actually give another
Accept
thing on Friday shopping list, man.
What's that? Well, let's do this. I want to make sure that Lori's finished kind of going through the plan, and then we do want to go through ideas and goals.
Well, and maybe you can include a discussion of how we plan our plan. What is
Right.
our plan to go through this? Because I don't think it's gonna happen in one night. We've already proven that.
Right, it's already 8
So we
o'clock.
need a process to do.
So it depends on the degree of planning you'd like. What we will be bringing you over the course of September are the action plans that accompany this. So I don't think it's an end of a discussion at all tonight. The action plans that accompany this for this coming school year, as
So
well
those
as
would
the
be-
school improvement plans.
CCHS K-8 or pre-K-8 or?
So the action plans we usually write as a K-8 document, because then the improvement plans are building based and
Yep.
takes care of making sure the high school has its own plan.
Good.
So that's the work we're gonna be doing in September. So by the end of September, you're gonna be seeing more of this start to flesh out. And I think maybe it would make sense to let all of those pieces of information come forward, as well as my goals and a lot more of the intricacies of how we're gonna accomplish this start to become part of our normal processes during the opening of the school year, and then see where we are for what else you'd like to talk about.
Okay, great. Then I have a suggestion in terms of process. Let me know what you think. I think clearly we're not going to establish our 5 or 6 goals here tonight, because it's a work in progress here, and certainly all the information that's coming is going to inform it. But I think it's likely that everybody probably has some ideas and a shopping list of things that they'd like to have done. So what my suggestion would be, let's go through that list and fill our bucket with ideas. And we leave here tonight with, here are ideas and concepts that there is interest in looking at. And over the next month, or more, 4 to 6 weeks, as we get more information from the schools and Lori, we can look at all of these, use this as our lens and our filter, and hone that down into our actual goals for the year. Does that make sense? So kind of for the last, let's say, 30 to 45 minutes here, let's hit on the ideas that everybody has, and we're not gonna debate everybody, but kind of make our brainstorming list, and then
So
we come
two,
back
two questions.
later,
One
yes.
is, are there 2 sets of goals, one for each committee, or are we
Yes.
trying to make one?
Yes, there are 2 sets of goals, absolutely. A lot of times what's happened in the past is that many of those are the same. That if there are 6 goals, 5 of them have been the same for the 2 different districts, but Concord has, you know, a goal or 2 that is unique, and the high school has a goal.
And the other question is timetable, so you wanna like try to freeze these goals by November, October?
What's realistic in terms of information?
In the past, as we've brought you the plans in September, which I'll remind you that the goal is to get those improvement plans and these action plans in the spring. And that needs to happen this spring so that you're not having all this information convention in September. We finalized goals, I'd say, November meetings for the school committee. Because the conversations would start in September, go into October based on the rest of the information. and
There's a
final.
roadmap, right?
Yeah,
Alright.
I think
And
that makes
timing
sense,
worked
given
pretty
the,
well, yeah.
given the timing for this year. And as we move forward and have more of this in the spring, you know, next year that might be able to be October instead of
Yeah,
November.
exactly.
And I think that at the same time, both the chairs and the superintendent can feel here today what do we all think is higher priority.
Right.
Like
And
the
please know, we
the
completely agree
well-being and the challenge success, I
priority.
think very clearly.
Right.
So-
It doesn't mean we're not working on anything
Yeah.
until November.
Precisely. Because at the end of the day, we don't want to be in a stage that we're reacting to something.
No, absolutely. We will have a feel for general high priorities already. So why don't obviously.
If I might just add one thing,
Yes.
and that is our goals don't emerge only from the strategic document.
Right.
You know, for example, we have baked in budgetary
We have budgetary
obligations, we have
responsibilities,
baked in superintendent evaluation,
Exactly.
Yep.
and so on, so they're not.
Yep.
Well, I think we also,
We're not subordinate to these in that same way,
Right.
perhaps, that some of the other stakeholder groups are, because.
We have other things that we have to
do.
do, exactly.
Yes.
Absolutely.
supporting
Should I
the
continue with
middle school building project.
Yep, so we
Some of
have,
those
I mean,
things.
you know, I
Can
didn't
you just,
pull them up. Do you wanna?
so, tell me how you wanna proceed.
I was gonna say, I could quickly go, there are a couple of, like you say, given goals, and maybe let's just hit on
last
those.
year's goals.
That's a great idea. Do you have them right there? I love your.
I have pulled them
That's
up
a good
here.
idea, thank you.
That's a very good idea.
Just to,
That's the region.
Let's
You're welcome to
quickly
take
look at last year's goals.
Yeah, I have.
Some of them are gonna be checked off or irrelevant, some of them are gonna be a given that we continue. Let's just go through them very quickly, and then we can go through everybody's
Change
list.
that.
So we're coming back to your list, you all.
Goals, then this, and then it's back to goals again.
Right, exactly. Let's,
Yeah.
I mean, that was kind of the gift of tonight, like all of these connect
Oh,
to
yeah.
each other, so to weave between the documents makes great sense.
But at least if we can agree on those things, it should be big
We've got
for us.
Concord,
Yes.
is there Concord?
That's Concord Carlisle.
That's another Concord.
You
um,
have-
This is,
Here's
I
a
have
Con-
Concord.
You can have.
Here's
that.
a Concord Carlisle.
There we go.
okay. So, is it okay, just cause I'm.
Oh, is it in the back?
Can I do a,
Nope,
Oh,
no,
this is a separate one.
yes.
like a 2-minute, 30,000 foot
Oh, here.
Please.
overview of what these were? Is that okay?
I'm good.
Okay.
Which one?
Okay.
Color?
So, what I'm gonna do, because several of them are
Ah,
the same, if you can we do a process here and have 2 in front of you?
yes.
And the ones that are the same, I'm gonna do at the same time, because a lot of them are. So A was budget development, that we do every year, it's gonna be a goal. Budget development process review, we were kind of implementing some changes last year as we created the budget subcommittee. And we can talk about whether we wanna continue to review that and make the process a priority or not, but that's what that was. C, superintendent support and evaluation, obviously continues.
Can I just make a small comment there?
Yes.
With the new pilot this year that I should have asked Dorothy to talk about before she left.
It's already on my list.
It's,
And I said, I wasn't clear in the email whether the MASC is wholeheartedly supporting this, and she said, oh, no, we are. And so since it sounds like it's easier, and it's not easy, but easier,
New kind of rubric,
yes.
they're piloting a new superintendent.
right.
So I strongly encourage us
It's mainly the
to,
rubric, not the
Yeah.
process.
I don't think it's the
Right,
process.
right,
the
rubric.
rubric, but that's a lot of the process.
Right,
Right.
it drives the process.
So I just strongly encourage us to pursue doing the pilot.
That was my hope.
I agree.
But the rubric should
I've
not
seen
drive the process.
I knew you were gonna correct me.
The rubric is a tool, the process is the process.
Yes, but
You're right.
do the pilot.
Yes, I've seen that, and that's something,
Okay.
I mean, I know Lori's interested in it, I've seen it, and I
Sounds like
think
you
it
need
would
to
be.
register.
So based on what I learned, really all DESI's looking for, if you're choosing to use the new tool that you say you're doing a pilot, which means they're looking for feedback at the end of the year from both the school committee and the superintendents to get a sense of
How
what people
successful.
thought of the new tool. So it's not anything more formal than that.
So I'm behind it, and unless anybody has any objections, I think we'll probably
I totally missed it.
assume that we'll go through.
This
use
comes
that.
from, just to orient people, it came from the finding that the one we used in the past was, quote, too detailed and complex, resulting in less effective evaluations.
No kidding.
Well, I think in a way, we parsed
Newsletter.
Yes, districts I think were,
to
Right.
identify the things that fit with the goals we were trying,
right,
rather than look at that and say, well, okay, we gotta do a little something on every one of these.
yeah. Yeah.
So we kind of took that on.
Still a big rubric, but I think between the collective efforts of MASC and MASS, there's some positives
We'll
there.
get you on
That's
the-
good.
So I think
We'll keep
I
this-
would,
Okay.
Anyway,
can we
Sorry.
try
yes,
to, we have one person to do. I would say in the process of doing that we also identify the things in that rubric that fit with the goals we're trying to reach. So that we're not, just because we're doing this pilot, we're looking at all of
Get everything right.
each individual piece and think we have to do something.
Right.
Yep, agreed.
Yeah, in the past, we've picked out the ones that are relevant to us to focus on.
I'll send that out
Okay.
to all of you so you can start looking.
Great, thanks. Next one was strategic plan, which obviously we're looking at, and I'm sure it'll be a part of what we do to continue to support Lori in her implementation of the strategic plan. Community engagement and communication has been something that we've been focused on for a while. We can all discuss whether that's still a high priority. I personally think it is, but that's something that was on last year. Cultural competency was a focus that we wanted to make sure we highlighted last year, and it's certainly still a district focus this year. Then we had, so let's see, now I'm gonna jump one to the other. At the regional, in the regional district, we had environmental sustainability, campus oversight, and bringing up the question of the regional agreement. So those were the three things that were
just a quick,
region related.
why did we not have environmental sustainability at Concord Public Schools?
You don't have problems.
Yeah, because
It's just how the goals
It
evolve.
was just,
Okay.
it was just that it came up in context of the region, so it was
That's right.
there.
Yeah.
It wasn't that we decided for Concord Public Schools that it wasn't a priority, it just, it came up through the region
No,
and it's.
I'm just asking that we put it into the.
Yeah,
we
so we
decide.
can decide, exactly, and that's why we're doing this now, so that it can
Yeah.
feed ideas. And this is why I'm doing it high level, we're not debating each one, but,
Yeah.
and then in Concord, obviously, Concord Middle School facilities planning, and we had assessing practices and protocols, which usually is on both of them. Oh, and was on both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So those were last year's, just so you have an idea of what was there.
Great.
And I think it does make sense to just kind of go around and let's all throw our ideas in that bucket. I'll take notes and keep a master list.
So, can I just a sec, you didn't throw
Absolutely.
anything out?
Oh, we
Well,
haven't,
I'd
I
like
wasn't
to-
even saying all these are on our
Yeah.
list. This was last
Thank you.
year's, so everybody
Okay.
can see it.
Okay.
So if there are things that we, agree are given, budget development, we're not gonna debate that. We know that's part of our job, that's one of our goals and priorities.
Yes.
So that's on our list, no matter what. Do you want to look at these quickly and,
Well, I would like to make a comment, just, I think as we have goals each year, some of these, for instance, cultural competency. This really developed at a school committee level around the calendar. And
Yes.
I don't know that our goal should be, we're not gonna add, at some point we need to consume this, we're subsuming this into the fabric of the district. So the cultural competency is not necessarily a school committee goal. It is something that, because it was a goal, we have it becomes part of the fabric
What we do.
of the district. Same thing with environmental sustainability. The oversight evaluation, that's sort of a piece of work that you do and ultimately it goes on. The strategic plan piece. There's kicking off the strategic plan, but then there's, at some point, the strategic plan is underway and
Sure.
it's part of the planning process.
Yeah.
So I don't know that, there are definitely budget development. The development process review is another one of those things that, I think we have to identify, are we done with that? Have we, I'm throwing that out for
Which one are we done with?
I don't know that we need another budget subcommittee,
Oh,
but we can choose to do that, but it may not necessarily be a goal.
right,
We have a policy review committee, maybe at one point that was a goal. Now it just is.
yes.
So I think it's
I think
important to
That's a
identify,
very good point.
that these are
Fold it into the
moving
budget.
along to a point where they either come off because they're done.
Very honestly, if I can add to what he said, I think there is a little mishmash here between kind of very general things that we have to do every year and some very specific things that are, cultural competency is actually a great example because the title is all encompassing, it can be, and then there's actually speaking about the calendar, which we either got there or we didn't get there, I'm not too sure. So at the end of the day, I think that it doesn't have to be thrown out, but maybe rephrased according to fill it with content. Budget, to do budget we have to do every year. It's not a goal, it's a...
I think it boils down to, are there things that we as a committee should be doing versus
Yes.
cultural competency is, we asked for it to become a highlight of what we're doing in the district. And if that's being done, then is it now still a goal of ours? Or is it our responsibility from more the strategic plan every year to make sure that those things we want done are being done?
But that's precisely I think that the tension between these two documents.
Yeah.
Cultural competency exists in 5-year strategic plan now.
Now it does. It didn't. I think some of these are,
This is-
Wally's point's right on, that
Yeah,
now
but
that
now
that
it
document's here, 2 years ago, some of these
Yeah.
had
But-
very different
We got,
pertinence
But
than
in
we.
order,
we got agreement on the calendar because, we had a bifurcation of the calendar. Because the Concord committee voted one way and the region voted another. And the way we got to a uniform calendar was that members of the Concord committee said, we will agree to this, but we need to focus on cultural competency in the district. It needs to be a major effort. And we did it.
And the committee took that on personally and had professional development and held forums, and I think I think I agree with all of you, it's part of the fabric now because it's in the strategic plan and it's part of our ongoing work.
It was a relevant-
It doesn't need to be a school committee.
It was a relevant goal at one point. Now
But
it's
the
not.
title, cultural competency, still is a very relevant
Oh, no
Right, now
question.
it's an
goal
ongoing
in,
thing.
goal in the
And that's where it should end up.
And maybe, at least in my shopping list, I've got things that are pinpointed that we can actually check, maybe ask during the year and.
Well, you brought up a good example before, right? Social emotional is in the fabric, it's in the goals, but
It's huge.
it's huge, and you highlighted a specific issue, which is a good one. So I just want to, distinguish in the goals, and I agree, it's a little bit of a mishmash, this document, but to my view, and I missed the beginning of Dorothy's presentation, but I think I can give it, which is, there are like 2 things we have to do, right? We have to develop a budget, and we have to evaluate the superintendent. That's what we have to do. So that's got to be in some form every year. It doesn't mean it's on their radar screen too, but we got to do it. Then all those specific projects that we want to highlight, like cultural, is exactly what I believe, a board of directors should be steering. So to me, you need a minimum of 2 goals, and then you should pick some projects.
Pick some other things to do.
Dorothy thought you
So-
might have too many goals, was
Yes.
one of her
Yeah.
pieces of feedback to me.
We have lots of things we
The
wanna do.
problem is that it's
Can we-
extremely difficult to measure progress when the goal is so wide.
Well, I'm going to throw a wrench into discussion.
Okay,
So, my question is the culture competency, is it separate from diversity, equity, and inclusion? Looking at the student achievement at the CCHS, I'm looking at the region. Should that be both merged together? As it reflects on the achievement and the well-being of the students?
You know, I wonder, I think it's an excellent question. I think it's gonna be, my guess is, and I haven't been through this annual process as many times as you have, but I'm guessing that it might be well answered by all of us when we go through this in more detail, where to Wally's point, we ask, one, is this still a school committee goal, or does it live somewhere else? And then two, if it's still a school committee goal, what are key actions that we still own? And what are some of the other key actions and who owns them now? Wouldn't that be wonderful to watch where they went elsewhere in the district as things get further embedded into, as Wally says, the fabric of the district. So I think what would be a helpful process for me is to go through each one and say, same or different goal, key actions,
Yeah.
which ones, and do they align with other key actions in other camps around the district?
and I would suggest, just process-wise here, because I'm also watching time. I think that's an important
Responsible
process.
adult.
And I don't think it's the step for right now. I think what we need to do is get through everyone's shopping list and have our overall list of possibilities. So far, I'm taking notes and I'm making a master list here. I have one list is goals and ideas for discussion for the year, and another is ongoing work. And some of these so far that we've mentioned already, I've put into both lists. So that later we can come back and we can go through all these. We can go through every one of these, and we can go through every one of our new ideas and say, is this relevant? Where does it live? Is it an action item? Is it a goal? Whatever it may be.
And
So
then-
I would recommend that right now, let's make our brainstorm list. And then we come back at a later date to really work it down.
And will something like Eva's question land on that list?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
And what she has highlighted, was one of my questions, what she has highlighted, that anything, that our job as a school committee, anything that touches on our job is to make sure that we are working for the student, for their achievement. So if it entitles the student achievement, then it should be one of our goals that, strategic goals that is included, going back to your working list. I don't know.
Okay, gotcha. As in, that should be one of the lenses
Right.
through which
lenses,
we look at these
which
things,
is okay.
student achievement,
That's right.
absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so we're gonna go, Yuval wants to go next.
I want to finish my thing. I want to do this.
We're gonna let Yuval get through the rest of
we
this.
each have our little things, well-being and challenge success in one, and cultural competence and inclusive. Actually, it's funny because I agree with Eva about the question whether cultural competency and inclusion is precisely the same thing. But we throw them into the same pot usually.
I'm not gonna get into answering all
okay.
these tonight, I think I'll just take the buck.
But I actually think that for
Yeah.
me, the thing is that we can actually put small, I mean, the big goals are there and we see the action items up. I want to throw some ideas on my shopping list that can become measurable, immediate, and things that we can actually have the power to change, I think. I'm not sure. One thing is in cultural competency, there is a program and it's regional, there's a program in the high school, multi-year programs of travel abroad. Checking the variety of offer there are some that are much more leaning toward cultural competency and inclusion and some that are less so, I think. Maybe we should actually try and encourage the programs that or ask the high school to try and offer travel abroad programs that are leaning toward cultural competency, which actually means
Okay, so I'm gonna say, sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, but I'm gonna say, I'm titling that review the opportunities of travel abroad.
precisely.
So we're not gonna debate it
Same-
now.
Can we just say travel?
Travel.
Travel, yeah, I agree actually, because it's not only abroad.
Right.
It's actually not abroad, it's precisely, I agree. Because it doesn't have to be abroad, there are many cultural opportunities and
Yes.
competence and inclusion here in the United States that are much cheaper and maybe at this moment much more urgent
Yep.
culturally.
Okay, good.
The other
Reviewing
thing, the
travel
same
opportunities.
thing goes to Q5. I think Q5 needs a presentation and it's an interesting program and I'm not too sure that we cannot try and as well ask a little more cultural competency there and inclusive programs.
Okay, so Q5.
There's
Okay.
another question about Q5. That I think that Q5 is something that should needs a presentation. I personally have another idea about Q5 that I don't know, it's not the place. Parking. Well-being, wellness, and parking. I don't think we fail.
Trying not to visually
We
react.
fail and we have to retake it. We have to retake it. We have to
Start it
retake
all up
it.
again.
We have to retake it and we have to discuss how and maybe have a subcommittee about it. But we have to retake it
Yep.
and
We have to deal with it.
And we have to deal with it.
Yep,
And
it's on the
you
list.
know,
Is that a school committee issue, really?
It's a side issue,
Well,
but
because of the budget
yes.
Well, and
implications.
if it
failed
ends up being a
budget.
warrant article, then we would be putting it forward, so yeah.
It's totally school. I mean, like, how can you do
I do
without-
have to agree with the parking stuff.
If the superintendent says it's a wellness issue that she can't solve alone,
Then it's
Is
also
it,
our.
is it the wellness because the juniors don't have a place to park or because we coddle our juniors? I'm not understanding.
It's
Look, can
actually-
hold on, can I jump in here right now?
Just answer
I think it's on the list. And I'm gonna try right now. In fact, I'm gonna apologize in advance to all 6 of you right now, that as you give me your list, I'm gonna be rude
That's
and
not-
cut you off and say, okay, it's on the
Rude's good.
list. We're not gonna debate it now,
Rude is
it's on the
good.
list.
Rude is good.
Yes.
Rude is good. I,
Apologies.
3 of us are members of the subcommittee of policy. And honestly, I think we have a lot of work this year. Not a regular revision of things, but we have to actually tackle specific items, I think. And many of them are around well-being and many of them are about inclusive culture. So we have a very old wording, I think, missing things. So I don't know how, and I don't know if that's the moment, but we have to actually schedule those things.
It's
We do
on the
need to
list.
schedule those.
And the last
I
thing.
guess I'd just say that is a policy, I would say that's a policy subcommittee discussion.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
I'm actually
It always
calling-
ends in
Yeah, I
flux.
agree, but I'm actually
What
asking
is
the
the
superintendent here to schedule it sooner than.
Yes, I was gonna open school and then.
Okay.
Yes, that tends to happen in
Next
the
week.
fall.
That's
okay.
Can't you do it before you open school? Oh, I
Then 12
can't.
hours
I
In the next 12 hours, yeah.
The last thing is something I totally don't understand. If we have a saying, we don't have a saying, it doesn't have to do is, though it can be a tool to all those things, is the school advisory councils. It's a legal requirement and it's an amazing tool if used correctly.
Yeah, I think
And
I'm gonna just push a little back on that one. You need to be very careful you're honoring ed reform and not overseeing your school advisory
Oh, absolutely not.
councils. And I've had discussions with the principals. We can talk on this later, but I might ask for some running room on that one.
But I said, I don't know if we have any, but at the end of
No.
the day, I think it's an important tool. That's my shot.
Okay, thank you. Here, you wanna go back to the,
No, what, go ahead.
oh, okay, or whoever,
No, I just think it's important that this, on Yuval's point, that the school advisory councils meet. That's all, we don't have any.
They're going to meet. I've already had this discussion with the principals.
Good, that's all.
Regrouping.
okay,
That's only,
okay. Who else wants to jump in? Who else has things to add to the list?
I don't have a
Eva,
list.
okay, I'm ready.
My shopping list.
I'm ready.
Okay, so going back to the inclusion, I'm really inclusion, diversity, and equity. It's really about being able, creating a learning environment that every student can learn, regardless of whether they're from where they come or what culture they are. So in some ways it touches on that cultural diversity. Teachers understanding the needs, particular needs of student body that is diverse, whether it's a minority student, it's a different religion student, the challenges and the cultural things that they are going through, maybe in a classroom.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying a focus on ensuring that every student feels included?
Feels included, and the teachers understand how to reach them. That building of relationships that Doctor was talking about in yesterday's presentation. So that's one thing on my shopping list. But I'm also looking at the special education, and with all of the changes and all the programs coming aboard, I would like to keep an eye, keep that information flowing to the school committee, so we know where we stand in terms of supports and tutors, and also transition of our students going into high school, whether they're on IEPs or 504 plans. The other thing on the list is we are trying to, the kids will be going through the testing, and the goal of the school committee is to keep the budget under wraps, and also keep lower that IEP number as well. So as these kids are going through the testing, looking at what supports we're giving, where we're catching, and how we are catching these kids up in a classroom, getting that information.
And sorry,
to
this
us.
is part of, you're saying this is part of the special ed focus you're talking about, or something
So-
separate?
So they are separate and sort of related,
And
because
related.
because we have students coming from middle school, right? They will be tested. And then there will be some students identified. They do the
These are
test.
school kids who are not under IEPs,
The kids that were,
RTIs.
yeah.
Okay.
Isn't that?
Right?
So kind of a
So we
review of,
screen-
It's the screen.
more of an
It's not a test, it's a
understanding of
screening.
RTI and RTI
Yes, it's that
screenings.
screening, so
Yeah.
just to see if they need a little help.
Yeah.
Okay.
That
The
was,
kids under-
that was tying into our budget, because if the teachers sort of can get them early, then
Right.
that's taken care of, and they don't have any issues.
The kids who are on IEPs,
They
yeah,
go
obviously
separately.
get this testing.
They're all screened. It's a
So-
universal screener.
Oh,
Right.
okay, okay.
But that's a separate thing.
It's a separate thing, I'm
Yes.
confused.
The IEP kids, we have, as the special education program gets revamped after the evaluation, we would like to know how those programs are moving forward, as a committee.
So I think she's referencing a couple of different moving pieces
Yes.
that do all connect to each other.
That's
Okay.
right.
The screener is a universal screener that we're giving to all of the freshmen to do another round of look for need and then to
Good.
intervene. We do give it to the kids in special ed because
Good, I
that's
think
good
that's
practice. A universal screener is universal.
Good,
It's given through the lens of already knowing there's
Yeah.
needs there versus in search of needs or,
Yes.
investigating needs. And I think then to your point, if we provide services in regular education under RTI, that then benefits the special ed programming because those two sit sister to each other in terms of intervening early prevents special education, and we then really have special education versus other things that can be offered earlier.
Yeah.
So.
Okay,
So
so
just
kind of some
keeping-
type of a,
Keeping
A
an eye
review
on
of
this
all of
review,
that
yes,
for us.
Yes, as the
Okay.
program evolves, and getting the idea where we stand and maybe some reports coming. How many kids came up, screened and came up with
But
problems.
can I just ask, so our list doesn't get so long? So when we see things on the strategic plan, specific things, is it implied that most of these things will come back to us?
Yes.
As action item.
It's gonna come back as action items, they're gonna be in my goals, there'll be threads of it all through the school improvement plans, and my bi-weekly report
Right.
gives you updates on
Okay.
the
I just want to.
day-to-day
As we
side of it.
Yeah,
proceed through.
exactly.
Okay.
Which is exactly why we're not gonna finalize it tonight, because as we come through, like this might end up on, you know, Lori's goals or one of the school improvement plans goals, and if we know we're gonna see it through there, it doesn't have to be one of our goals.
Because we can't really
But-
take action.
So right now, exactly, we're gonna put everything on the list, and then we'll figure out
Yep.
where they all live.
Can I step in here on this, on the special ed topic? I had just written down support the special ed transitions that are going on. And I think, you know, from where I sit, our responsibility should be through understanding where we are in transitions, which means updates.
Yep.
That we are prepared to focus energy if necessary on
Mhm.
things that need to be done and approved and studied
Sure.
to approve, that would be something that we were prepared to focus on if needed during the course of the year, because we are in a transitory state. of special ed. So I think
Transitory state about what?
special ed.
Special education.
Because of the new administrator and all
No, we just
The new,
did
the new
West End
programs that we've
program.
built and the new service delivery models, which does
Taking
have
a
some
different-
financial piece to it, of some ebb and flow of hiring and programs and savings and out of districts. I know I need to bring you all of that, I have that planned for September to at least give you the update as to where we are.
So like
So that's a valid,
Support word is good.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Because
Okay.
the whole program was trying to actually keep more of the special.
That's one of the
resilience.
pieces, yeah.
Okay, good. So that,
I'm all
that's right. Okay, you're good. Cynthia, did you have others or no?
No,
You've all even through yours. Court, other things to add?
Not in terms of goals per se, I think our list is pretty ambitious and we've got a lot of refining to do.
Yes.
I'll be curious just on a more sort of programmatic level to learn more about how the language program at CPS is evolving, now that it's a little more mature.
Spanish?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Some of these programs,
Great
as they
question.
mature, it's nice to revisit them.
It's a great question.
STEAM, I know we're gonna learn more about how we're employing our new resources.
I don't know if you made it to the lab open house, but
Not
we're
yet,
gonna
no,
bring you a
no.
tour if you have,
Good,
because
good.
it's
So those
fantastic
things
down the
we'll be
hall.
interested in, and then we'll always step
You
back
were
and
there.
ask, how does that fit into
Yeah.
the larger set of priorities and goals around those priorities? And then I would note that I think we will be attending to certain bargaining unit contracts this year.
yes.
So there's a lot on our plate right now.
Which contracts are up
Both.
this year?
Well, we have a CCTA contract in total, and then we have compensation issues around the CTA contract, which we
So the
purposely,
CCTA one is, we're in a negotiation.
Yes.
this is a negotiation, and we just negotiated the CTA contract, but we left the compensation issues open. We just basically took the same thing we had last year to this year, so that we could negotiate compensation together with the CCTA.
So you.
Otherwise, we're
you
constantly in
reference the
this-
contract that's going to come, or?
We-
How will you call
we
that in the
will- We
CTA
will
this
open
year?
up negotiation with the CTA this year as well as the CCTA.
Okay, a year ahead or a
Around
year
com-
behind? And that-
We basically have a one-year contract.
Okay, so you
Yeah,
set a
well,
one-year
that-
contract, so that you
Yes.
would line them up.
Sync up the time.
But the things that everything that's non-compensatory, we agreed would carry forward under the new 3-year contract. So
Right.
what we ultimately will have at the end of the year, if all goes as planned, is, one is the bargaining for each, it'll be a burden for sure, but the bargaining for each unit will be in the same calendar year. Otherwise, we're constantly, this was this.
So do you have one negotiating committee or two?
Definitely.
Yeah, because
And do we have a
we negotiate
secretary?
with two different groups, so.
What's that?
Secretaries,
Mm-hmm.
that as well this year?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think that's the only other one.
That's the only other one I'm aware of.
Yeah.
So anyway, I have no ads.
Okay.
Thank you.
I would just add in the Concord School Committee that we continue to support our building project as one of our goals.
Of course.
So
Which
that's,
we
that's on the list.
Yes.
The other things I was thinking, I think have been covered so far. Wally, did you have anything else to add?
Well, I think that, and I think we need to determine on the middle school project, now that we're, in the realm of it is within a town sphere because of the building project, I think we need to identify, as far as preparing for a funding request, which it sounds like would be at a special town meeting in the fall. Or how much of that, what are we gonna do?
What's our role?
And whatever we are gonna do, I assume has to be in concert with the town / the building
The
committee.
building committee.
But I do think we have shown a fairly strong capability of advocating for things that we think are important in front of town meetings. So I don't think we should just assume that because it's a town project,
Oh, no.
that we're not involved.
Oh, no, no, no.
So there's our building committee involvement, but then I think there's the overarching funding issue that we have to determine, probably in concert with the town manager and the town finance director, what our role is gonna be as a committee.
Strongly agree.
Definitely.
I had written, we talked a lot about reducing student stress without reducing rigor last year. And, and then we talked about challenge success, and I think they dovetail somewhat. And I think that's something that we want to make sure is we're doing everything we can as the two districts. I'm not, I'm just still thinking about what you've been talking about with challenge success. And, is that something that, do we want, I'm thinking, is this something we want to hear from each building about what they're doing relative to that, so we can learn better where we are? And then consider whether or not this is something that we collectively think we could benefit the districts by having another round with challenge success as an organization, to, one, potentially tell us how we're doing against other programs that are trying to operate in Massachusetts. And then the other piece, which I think we talked a lot about, and I think is the crux to the matter, is, how do we bring, what tools have they seen be effective, because we're not unique in our, the parents of the community, or the sort of socioeconomic strata we're in. What has challenge success seen that's worked to bring people to a discussion, and what do those discussions look like that help people start to get their arms around this? Because we were talking about this, and I'm thinking, yes, in the aggregate, we all agree that, yeah, some kids shouldn't be applying to Ivy League schools, but that's not my kid,
Right.
and I don't think it's even, it's not just, I want my child to apply to these schools. It's, I have my friends over and they all went to Ivy League schools or NESCAC schools. Well, that's regional in nature. That's not, same thing doesn't happen in Southern California.
No, there's a version of it.
Yeah, there is.
But they went to USA and they went to.
Just the name's different.
But but these are things that they're experiencing. When we talk about, I don't think I'm putting the pressure on the kids. They're seeing who we spend our time with, where we went to school, who we live amongst, and tacitly we're indicating to them that's what you have to do to live in Concord.
You can have a cultural
You're making
competency
it
discussion
Yeah.
of you come in with these implicit biases that you're
That's
not
right.
even necessarily
Yeah,
aware of.
exactly.
And that's
Yeah.
the discussion we probably.
What is
And I
more
also
equally, I just
want
want
to-
When we were talking about multiple paths to student success, the question that started to rise for me was, are we as a school committee modeling how we recognize multiple paths to success generally?
Right.
And the answer is probably no, not enough.
I don't know.
We talk about multiple paths for
Sure.
students, multiple paths for everybody.
Right.
That's where I was getting to
So-
about the book.
I
I
want,
feel like
I want to make
we're just talking about
clear
college,
about something about
you know?
what I said. I think that well-being and socio-economic, socio-emotional of our students probably should be the number one goal for all of us, or at least for the district, because we all agree about it in the context. I brought challenge success here as something we can, because we were speaking about monitoring progress, and there's a lot of talk about the well-being and a lot of talk about doing things, but they actually have been in the system, in our system now 3-4 years, and they can actually look back at us from outside and say what we did, or what we did wrong, or what we didn't do, or that's for
I know
me
the first
a
thing I
tool.
recommend is we give surveys again, so
Okay.
that's on our list.
Okay, so to get us back to that list,
Yes.
I have added here, in addition to challenge success, and I think Lauren made an interesting point, it's not just challenge success, just like you've all just said, it's all about the social emotional health and decreasing stress. So those are now on the list as 2 unique items, and if we could move on through the list.
And increasing health. And the one thing I can't let us get away from not mentioning vaping is just,
As part of this.
it's just.
Is that a real issue here?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, is it?
We
Oh,
And the
definitely-
town, the
definitely.
town is on the verge of,
Yes.
the Board of Health is on the verge of banning tobacco and vaping
But the reports
sales
are-
and product,
Anything above
Kids
zero.
Which
getting
is
lung
gonna make
disease and.
But we're all.
sand the water look like chicken feed.
Yeah, right.
So one more
The
thing.
kids don't have enough.
I don't think it's a goal and I don't think it's a point there, but I would like to encourage the superintendent. By nature of this district, we hear a lot about great successes of the district in ski, in tennis, in soccer and stuff. There are some spectacular performing art programs in the district which we hear much less about, if anything. So and it's something that really we should hear more and promote, I think, as part of well-being, as well as creativity and many other things here that are in this list. So maybe we can get more recognition
Yeah,
of this program.
I don't disagree, I think, there's.
Mr. Nossi, Mr. Gresco, they, tours to Japan, gold in Mica, they're actually achievements that we.
I have tried very hard to get a lot of those musical
Even when
folks
they-
here,
when
and
they're-
their schedules are very busy and
Yes,
I
you're
have
superintendent, tell them to
successful-
come.
at 7 o'clock at night, yeah, with students. They always tell me they're out with the kids somewhere. I can't really argue
but
with
honestly,
that.
even when we had the student representatives presenting the achievements of the school, they all spoke about sport.
They do mention the play and.
They do, I actually
Like,
feel pretty strongly that, and this is not tonight's discussion, but I feel very strongly that CCSS very much values its arts.
Yeah,
Programs.
definitely, but
Excellent.
I think that we should
From
actually
the-
There's
make,
more play.
in this place, we should make a
Yeah, I agree, I think
high
we do and
recognition.
probably can more. Okay, so I made
I
a
think
note
the
of that.
court's
There
point
is
about
so
are
many
we
things here
doing,
about creativity and stuff.
Yeah,
I think the court's point, are we modeling the behavior we would expect? Well,
Right.
us having, some representatives from the play come after the play is run
or even
and
before.
recognize the great work they did from our seats, like we do when somebody wins a
Sure.
championship.
In effect, teach us multiple paths to success,
Yes.
right here. Teach us more about it.
Where are we?
Before we move on, thank you, Cynthia. Any other things for the list from you, Wally?
Well, I do want to just recognize that for the first time in Lori's tenure here, we have, especially now that we've hired a special ed person for the high school, a full complement of administrators.
Yes.
And
That's a lot
No
harder.
doubt about,
Now, the thing that I think is important from our standpoint is to recognize that that requires a lot of onboarding.
yes,
And
it
so
does.
as we think about the things we're asking
Yes,
people
thank
to
you.
do this year,
Yeah.
we have to recognize there is a very significant effort being undertaken
Yeah.
here that has to be done and has to be done
Supported.
well.
Yes.
And the room to do that has to be given.
Thank you. Thanks
So
for
I think we have to be
And
careful
the
about what we lay onto that over the course of the year.
In the first
Constant reminder.
presentation of us being presented to the new cafeteria administrator. It was
Right.
very, very impressive in the morning of the,
They're an amazing
Yes.
group, but to Wally's point, we are definitely in transition, so,
Yeah.
and they need
And
to have
that's-
room for entry and relationship building and not come in guns blazing, or we won't stay successful, so.
You just touched on something I was gonna bring up as I close this list, and I know, David, I wanna get back to you, but because you mentioned that, I'm just gonna say it now, that the one other thing that I would add as a filter to all of this is pacing. It's something we've certainly talked about a lot, because you're right, the on-ramping is part of that, there's a lot that goes along with it. And it's something that we both have to use as a filter, and also, I think, be actively thinking about constantly throughout the year, because we ask a lot of our administrators, of Lori, of her whole team, and
And of our teachers,
of our
which,
teachers.
I mean, it trickles all the
It
way
does,
down.
it does.
So,
And we wanna make
it's an important
sure
conversation.
that we are retaining them, and that we are allowing them and enabling, empowering them to have that social emotional health that we also are striving for the kids. It's really important for the adults also. So I just wanna keep that on our
Especially like the building
filter,
project
right,
and.
and on our
The
list.
rest of their day
I
job.
think, and we've had a lot of talk about this summer, and the messages we've sent out to the staff, both yesterday and through the buildings today, we're gonna do more better. And I need to ask you to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
We need to pick the priorities. This list is
It's
almost
long.
giving me a panic attack,
Right,
but I know
no.
we'll bet it.
We're gonna filter.
We've gotta pick the priorities and go deep and do it right and
Yes,
really delve in so we can manage it. I mean, some of the things you've talked about are all symptomatic of how many balls are in the air all the
Right.
time, and that's the coming conversations,
Exactly.
obviously.
and that's the kind of the piece that goes over all of these items
Yeah, I
is
think-
priorities and pacing.
If I can add to that, I think to your point, I mean, when we looked at what we accomplished last year and the year before that, so you're 2 years here, which really, there was a huge transition that was a long time coming.
Yes.
And there was a lot of pent up demand and desire to do some things that weren't getting done. And we undertook those with gusto. We, I think as a committee, took on way more than most school committees would take on in the form of our own responsibilities and work. Something that's not sustainable year in, year out. But also, we have to we have to recognize what we're asking of the
Yes.
district to do, because when the day is done, the district is about student achievement. And, there is a process that starts tomorrow and goes through the end of the year, and it doesn't change a lot.
Yeah.
And incrementally, we can change it. But, we've really asked a lot of people over the last couple of years, and I think we ought to make sure that we give that stuff. It's like, for the first couple of years that I was on the committee, we had this fatigue from mandates. And, we kept saying, you just gotta give some of these things time to work their way into the process, rather than, well, that didn't work, so 18 months later, we're changing it, which was what we were getting from the state. We have to be careful we don't do the same thing
No,
as a
I agree.
committee. So,
Yeah, just for, and I know we're getting late, but it's probably worth saying, trust is still very fragile here. We've made a huge amount of progress in 2 years, but it is it's in its infancy. And we need to be very respectful of that and very careful that we don't suddenly, and I say we, and I'm really saying we collectively, because I know how careful I need to be personally, we can't become this top-down mandate around here. You're gonna go slide right back where you were in a district that has moved so far in terms of teacher trust, relationships with the administrators, relationships with the school committee, the schools and the town, like, big picture, we have come a long, long way, but it is really fragile. I can say one thing with a slight impression that someone gets, and I have to slow way down and go way back and talk through what I really meant and how we're gonna get there. And I need to say that out loud, because nothing can happen without those processes, and my credibility has come to be that I will provide those processes. So I think that's one piece.
Important, it's very important.
And then two, a lot of these connect to each other, so I think that's the good news. There's a lot of complementary work here that doesn't have to be, they're not standalone initiatives. All of this is about student well-being through the paths of engaging environments, support to kids, they feel welcome and included, and we engage a community, start to talk on those value systems. So it feels like a lot, but I think if we can figure out what those priority works are. And I also want to be sure we give room for teacher voice, because that is what's starting to emerge. And again, in its infancy, because we've been empowering them and they're starting to trust us. You heard my message yesterday. If you have a new idea, try it. We've got to give room for those ideas to grow and flourish, because frankly, the more that comes from them, there's no buy-in to worry about. They believe it, they sell it to each other, and good ideas take off. So I just want to, those are a lot of moving pieces, but they're parts of the discussion, for sure.
Definitely. Before we wrap up, David, we don't want to skip you. Did you have anything else to add?
Well, I have nothing new. I
To our
want
brainstorm
to
list.
sort of put a couple of distinct points on what I've heard. So on the last one, on the pacing, I think, and I now thinking a fair amount of this in my own committee in Carlisle, because we have 4 new members now, or three new members and one that's not going to be up anyway. So this has got a heavy experience component in this axis here and a very new group here. And I think your pace, one of the things as a committee we should embrace is that it's a multi-year process. So we don't have to do everything, as you said, this year.
Right.
And we need committee development. So I presume you 2 guys are terming out. So that means.
I'm not.
Okay.
Well, it is
Okay.
Strive.
So that's good, because that means, you get
One at
you
a
get
time at
a
least.
progression. We unfortunately couldn't control it because somebody moved to Concord and,
Right.
this and that. But, and it's with small committees, 7's better, right? But 5, you get quickly unstable. So I think it's very important, from my view, from my committee, but looking at this committee too, you 3 are gonna go through a very steep learning curve over the next year. You're gonna be seasoned hands this time next year. You're gonna move on, we're gonna get somebody else rejuvenating, and I'm not sure where you are in the cycle of court, but, we just need to be mindful that we're sort of maturing our own committee as well. So that's
Yep,
just on that point.
definitely.
That's a very good one.
Yep.
On the, and I'm just going sort of backwards, on the SPED issue, since Eva and I are both parents of SPED kids, from my view, and it goes a little bit to the core teaching too, I see the goals here, the priorities, I guess they're called, about not just, we spending a lot of time on social, emotional, and the experience and all that, and we need to do that, but we're a school, right? And we're anyway focused on high achievement, so that I'm not worried about emphasizing high achievement, but because of my particular kids, and to some degree your kids or other people's kids, I don't want to talk about, but there's a need to always stay focused on just the basic building blocks of learning.
Right.
I feel, and this is not a CCHS comment, this is more of a Carlisle public, and I'll just be an open meeting, I'll say it. There's a little overemphasis, in my opinion, and I've made this point to our superintendent, of a little too much maybe of the context of learning. Some of the kids just need to learn some basics. And I'm not, so it's no criticism of this region because I don't know it yet. Just want to make sure that SPED team that's in transition, that they stay focused on the basic building blocks for those who need it. Okay, so that's that one. On Yuval's comment about the travel and the Q5, again, I would say we should look at those extracurricular quote-unquote activities in the context of aligning with student goals. It doesn't have to be cultural competency goals, it's just goals. Is the trip or the activity accretive to the goal? That's what I would say. That should be our lens. And then it should be looked at that.
Then on community engagement, I'll put a pitch in for Carlisle, it's one of those communities, right? And I think something that I've tried with mixed success to do, but we certainly can do it, is encourage a little more of the across the two towns.
That's a good point.
I've tried, not successfully with the prior Concord administration to get this monthly sort of chairs conference or whatever, but I think it would go a long way to alleviating some of the other issues we have from time to time if we would just get together and have coffee.
Connect more, yeah.
And I think we should, because we are the cross town, what do you call it?
We're the link.
We're the link, so we should work
Yeah.
on that. I think we should.
It's a good point.
And then back to just the goals as stated. On the two budget goals, I think in the A budget goal, I don't see the word affordability. And it's always a tension between being a spokes body for the goals of the school and the needs of the town.
That's a
You
great
guys have
point.
been through it, and we go through it every year. So I think, again, it's incumbent on us to be the mature people with the credibility. Like, we could just be a shill for the schools, but we would lose credibility on the
No,
town
that's
side.
our responsibility.
We need
No, I
to
think,
show and always say, how we're doing it.
Correct. Excellent, thank you.
And then on the B, on the process one, and I'm not knowledgeable about this process, but I was just talking to Dorothy about this. On the transparency of the process. Again, I haven't gone through it yet, and we have a problematic issue of, do you do the body and fender work of budgeting in an open subcommittee, which every subcommittee is now an open subcommittee. Thank you, Attorney General and Town of Concord. But that's the way we are. Or do you let, Jared and the team do it? Like, I think the way it's done now, Jared and the team does it, and then there's some kind of nominal oversight by the budget committee. I know you've got a plan, and maybe that's the way it'll work this year, but I'm very interested in finding ways to, I've been at budgets with schools for 15 years, so I would really like to see, and I'm not only speaking of Concord, but Carlisle as well, a way to kind of bridge that gap, to have a meaningful subcommittee engagement that, will be open. They may or may not show up. Obviously sensitive information can't be part of that, but some where there's really true, because I'm reading the Dorothy slides, true engagement by the school committee in the budget making process, not just the review of something that's been made.
Okay, good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
That's
I
great. And
I just want to clarify, because we do have new people. I don't know if we can talk about this enough, but what we have been doing, prior to creating a budget subcommittee, the way we were doing the budget was primarily the chairs of each committee. We were working with the superintendent and the finance director on specifics of the budget. And then there was discussion here about things that are happening in that process on an ongoing basis. And we ultimately get to the point sometime late in this calendar year, here's what the budget looks like. The budget subcommittee, as we sort of talked about that, and we had this, what can we talk about, and what's when we talk about anything in public, what's productive to talk about in public. And we came to the conclusion that the budget subcommittee should really be focused on the machinations of the approved budget for the, in this case, the fiscal year 20 budget. And what's going on with that, and that's
Good.
how the signing the warrants falls out of that, and it's sort of an update, a regular, more detailed update than we're going to do in every school committee meeting about that. Now, and that we would continue the approach that the chairs would be engaged in the ongoing development for, in this case, fiscal year 21 budget. And that's where we are right now. So we can, as one of our goals here, we can talk about, do we continue the budget subcommittee that we had? Was that valuable?
Okay.
Should it have different goals as a subcommittee? And, it would be, it would be great to be able to sit down in the meeting and talk about the budget amongst all of us and should be able to have this sort of free-form flow, but that's not the way the law allows.
The only problem that I see when I to this discussion whether we need or don't need a subcommittee, at the end of the day, the chairs are changing every year. Every year there's a new chair. Some of us have got more affinity to numbers. Some of us have got much lower affinity to numbers. I think that the advantage of having a subcommittee is that there is a chance that there'll be a member there that will do it for 6 years and we have the learning curve. It will save so much time, it will save so much. So the mechanism of a chair speaking about it is questionable simply because of the fact that the chair is changing every year. To have somebody that knows how to crunch numbers and goes into subcommittee today and stays 6 years in the subcommittee, I think it's a practice.
Yeah, and that's a great point because that's a situation that we are facing in Carlisle where I've done it forever and I'm trying to hand it off, but I can't just hand it, you know? So I have a personal interest in Carlisle to make it kind of a, you know, a two-person, which immediately throws it in the committee. So it's challenged me to think about it, not just me, but I'm challenging myself and others to think about how the hybrid model works, where it's not under the cloak or it's chair only and then it's suddenly revealed. I mean, to your point exactly, and it goes to my first point, which is succession planning within the committee.
And that may very well be what the budget subcommittee should be charged with doing this year.
Yeah.
Is trying to come up with that concept, because that was one of the things we talked about before.
Honestly, a good business manager that knows his number right can sell whatever he wants to sell to a committee member that doesn't know how to actually analyze what he's saying. Yeah, not because he feels bad, because he believes in what he's saying, because he knows how to deliver it very quickly, and because we go, so at the end of
This one has the numbers to
Okay.
back it up.
Yeah.
but let's face it, that's how it goes.
Okay, so I
So
think
one
that's,
other, so while we're talking about budget, and the nod to the affordability piece is definitely important. My personal thinking on this is part of our responsibility is to understand what we need to continue to offer level service, what we need to do to offer things we think are growth to the program. And then with that in mind, take into account affordability and then approach our moving forward on a budget with those things in mind.
I think that's what
Recognizing, some years are gonna be better than others, some circumstances are gonna be better than others for times to try to advance program.
Yeah.
And I think we also need to be, fortunately, we've been in this period of fairly strong economy and, but seems like we may be headed to rougher waters.
The Donald's gonna take care of it.
And we could be back where we were, 08, 09, and we need to be really careful about losing program.
Yep.
Because we lost a lot of program through that period of time, and it took us a full 10 years to get it back. So I think those are important big picture things to think about. I, for one, think next year's committee will probably be in a different place than this one when we start talking about budget.
Well,
It'll be an
Yeah.
interesting year.
you have to always build advocacy
Yes.
in town and not, can't be complacent or arrogant, but the biggest single, regardless of what you believe in the value of education, the biggest single driver to your house value is the quality of the educational system of your town. So if you can't appeal to people on the more altruistic or parental, concern about educating your children, you appeal to their pocketbook. But we always have to make the point all the time, is what I've found.
Exactly.
Okay,
Okay.
You
and
said
I think we're
no.
good. There's one more thing, unless, I think we're good with this. Let me just wrap this up because I've been going through this.
Yeah, we want
Um,
a quick vote.
I think we need to, I have a full list. I'm not gonna go through all of them right now, but I have a full list of what everybody brought up. What I can do is send it out to everybody afterwards as just kind of the review. Here's what I captured. If there's anything I missed, let me know. And as we look at agendas and dates and meetings, we'll figure out when and how, but we will communicate out a plan of when we will come back to this, which will be in the next couple of meetings, to review these and basically start to filter it down. Some of them will combine, some of them will fall under Lori's bucket, some of them will fall under other buckets, and we'll figure out what our succinct goals are.
Good.
Sound good?
Are you secretary of this meeting?
Yeah, I don't know, it seemed like we needed a process and I
No,
saw
but I
it,
mean,
so
we do have to produce minutes, right?
Yeah,
Oh,
Erin's
no,
doing
Erin's
it.
gonna do the actual minutes
Very
from the
clever.
report.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I was just doing this to keep us
Good.
organized, just seemed like we needed a path. So I,
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I think we're good on all of these things then. We just have one action item because we need to vote to approve a staff request. And for some reason I can't access it. So does anybody have it in front of them?
So Bo Fang, teacher at CCHS, is requesting that we approve his request for his child who's entering 9th grade to attend Concord Carlisle High School beginning immediately. There's sufficient space and in line with policy contract language, I would recommend this to be approved. Lori, is there anything you want to add to this?
I mean, the timing's probably part of your questions. There's no timeline on contractual,
That's fine.
right, for teachers, so it
Pop in the middle of the year.
worked out the way that it did. There's an extending situation here that I don't feel comfortable totally sharing in public, that I've worked very closely with Bo on, and Dee Dee's met the qualifications of the contract, and worked hard to do that, so I think.
Good.
Is this
So-
enrolled in this right now?
Yes, yes,
So,
well,
Nothing like the last.
soon as we can, yeah.
Just in time approvals.
Right,
So moved.
right.
Well, no,
Oh, yeah.
so can I have a motion that the Concord Carlisle School Committee votes to approve the request of Mr. Fang to enroll his child in Concord Carlisle High School and the tuition be waived?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion?
Yeah, I have a discussion item that's not pertinent to this particular situation, but we run into this a lot in Carlisle, and you may run into it at CPS, where we do it at the K through 8, we have the same kind of vote thing, right? Then that kid goes to 9th grade, and it's sort of assumed that the child will stream right on into CCHS. I'm told, and I don't know this, that that's kind of what happens
Yes.
at
Yeah.
Concord.
Yep. Kind of.
And we know it can't exactly happen at Carlisle, and in fact, we even had it in a CTA negotiation or contractual negotiation, where we had to, clarify that it's not our call. In other words, not Carlisle's call. So I think something to do as a housekeeping, whenever, is we should clarify and streamline that process in some way so that both systems are treated similarly, that it's understood, or however we codify it, that children of teachers in the K through 8 systems.
Yeah, we have approved all of the Carlisle.
No, I know you have, so it's never been an issue of not
Yeah.
approving, but it's a bumpy procedure, so that's what
That's
I'm
always the first time if you will not behave.
It would have already happened in that case. No further comment.
Okay.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Just a note, I will not be here for the next two meetings. One will be a CPS meeting and one will be a regional meeting. So if you can chair the regional meeting, and I will attempt to dial in to both of those, but I'm not sure yet if I'll be able.
So procedurally, relative to the earlier conversation, should I be playing a role in coordinating the agenda, or are you gonna do the agenda?
You should probably do that because I won't be here.
Okay, so just reach out to me, okay.
Yeah, normally
So the
the
three of us
get
get together.
for joint,
Yeah.
Yeah.
so we will.
For the joint meeting at least,
Yeah.
Lori and Alvin.
Yeah.
Concord meeting.
Great.
Right. For the
Okay,
end of the
thank you.
I apologize, but
Drunk
couldn't
with
do more.
Enjoy.
No worries. Do you have anything else before we adjourn? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is that for both committees?
Yes, it is. Both
Is
committees.
there a second?
Second for both.
All in favor for Concord?
Aye. All in favor for the region?
Aye.
All right,
Thank you.
Thank you.
14, we did it. Well done, guys. That's a
All right,
lot of
that's a
work we got
good
done.
meeting.
Go home.